welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for September 18, 2018. Item number 1, if we could call the roll, please.
Yes. Councilmember Luce?
Here.
Councilmember Lehman?
Here.
Mayor Mars?
Here.
Councilmember Whiting?
Here.
Councilmember Mokel?
Here.
Thank you. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, Mr. Reynolds?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Mokel. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Item number 4, consent agenda. Are there any additions, subtractions, Mr. Reynolds?
Nothing from staff.
Councilor Mokel?
I would offer moving 8A4 to the consent business. Others? If not? Councilor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the consent business as modified.
I have a motion and a second. Before we vote on the modified consent agenda, we would read it into the public record then. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mayor Mars and members of council. These are the consent agenda items for September 18 of 2018. 4A1 approves the minutes of the September 4, 2018 meeting. 4A2 approves not waiving the monetary limits on tort liability for the LMC IT property and liability insurance renewal. 4A3 adopts resolution number R2018 TAC 112, which consents to the Economic Development Authority in and for the City of Shakopee adopting a proposed special benefit levy of $350,000 collectible in 2019. 4A4 adopts resolution number R2018 TAC 113, which declares the amounts to be assessed, orders the preparation of proposed assessments, and sets the public hearing date for delinquent refuse bills. 4A5 adopts resolution number R2018 TAC 114, which declares the amounts to be assessed, orders the preparation of proposed assessments, and sets the public hearing date for delinquent ordinance services. 4A6 approves the purchase and installation of a new replacement uninterruptible power supply for the main data center from EPS Electric in the amount of $26,985 with a 5% contingency. 4B1 declares bicycles held by the police department as surplus property and authorizes their proper sale or disposal. 4B2 adopts resolution number R2018 TAC 106, which accepts the 2018-2019 Ford Zero Deaths Grant. 4C1 approves purchase of 3 2019 Ford Utility Police Interceptor AWD vehicles from Ford of Hibbing in the amount not to exceed $86,938.35. 4C2 adopts resolution number R2018 TAC 107, which supports the LMC letter in opposition to proposed U.S. Senate Bill S3157 and urges Minnesota's senators and House representatives to oppose Senate Bill S3157. And finally, 8A4 is the monthly financial review.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. The consent agenda has been read into the public record. I have a motion and a second. There is no further discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Item number 5. Now I'd like to call on a resident that would like to come forward on an item not on the agenda. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome. On an item not on the agenda. Seeing none then, we would move ahead to public hearing 7A, authorization of issuance of revenue bonds for the benefit of the Benedictine Living Community of Shakopee. Counselor Mokel?
I'll make a motion to open a public hearing.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Loose to open the public hearing. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, public hearing is now open. Michael will present.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the required public hearing to issue bonds for the BHS project. This has been a long time coming. Everything has been approved on this. This is the last piece. These bonds are not obligations of the city. We're basically a conduit. We've done this before for other similar nonprofit projects. We're having an issue tonight on the sound. We have council here tonight and she'll be happy to answer any specific questions that council may have.
Questions of staff? These are not considered GO bonds or revenue of the project bonds?
Correct, Mayor.
Councilor Lehman?
Under no circumstances is the taxpayer liable for any payment of the revenue bonds.
Mayor and council, that's correct. These are strictly revenue bonds based off the asset of the project.
Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Kevin Rymanowski, Chief Financial Officer with Benedict Health System. And just thank you for this opportunity. This is our 5th major project here in Shakopee since we started back in 1995, I think, with building the first piece of St. Gertrude's. And so we're excited about this opportunity and to continue growth here in the town with you. So thanks for your consideration. Any questions?
Questions?
I have one.
Councilor Lehman?
You said you had 4 or 5 previous projects.
Yes.
Are them bonds all retired at this point?
Have they all been paid off?
Yep.
No, we're in the process. 95, we did the initial care center. We added to it in 1999 or 2000. It was when we opened. Then we did it 2003 refinancing. 2004 we added, and so we're still in the process of paying those off and right on schedule.
Other questions of the developer? If not, thank you. Good evening.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Gina Ferini from the law firm of Kennedy and Graven. We serve as bond counsel to the city. I just want to reiterate what Mr. Kursky already said, and that is that these bonds are not a debt or obligation of the city. No taxing power or tax revenue or other revenues of the city are pledged to the repayment of the bonds. The bonds will solely be repaid from the borrower, or by the borrower. The borrower will pay all costs of the city and pay the city's administrative fees. And I'd be happy to answer any more questions that you may have about this financing or conduit revenue bonds in general.
Councilor Lehman.
Why don't you explain to the general public why we're funding this through the city instead of them doing it on their own?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, so the federal tax law allows certain entities to get the benefit of tax-exempt financing, which means that the interest earned on the bonds is tax-exempt, which means that Benedictine Health System pays a lower interest rate on the financing. Congress has decided in enacting various tax laws that certain types of entities should get the benefit of having tax-exempt financing. Nonprofit entities such as Benedictine Health Systems are one of those such entities. And in order to get the benefit of that financing, they have to go through a conduit issuer like the city.
Follow up?
Yeah, could they have gone through the county?
Potentially, yes.
Or the state even?
Pardon?
Or the state even?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, there are certain other entities that would potentially be able to issue bonds. The city of Shakopee would still have to provide some sort of approval for the financing, though, as well.
Councilor Lewis?
Would I be correct in saying that the city will get some administrative fees for this and that they will be more than likely at a premium so that not that we're making money, but we're not going to lose a dime?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. The city will be getting an administrative fee of $50,000.
Other questions? I believe that this is the same conduit funding, bonding that they used for the All Saints many years ago in our community, is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I apologize. I actually am not familiar with that financing, but it very well could be the case. It is like the other financings that have been done in the past for Benedictine Health System. As I mentioned, there's been a number of bonds issued for the St. Gertrude's facility.
Councillor Whiting?
Mr. Mayor, this is a project that I'm excited to see to come to Shakopee. This is a process that it's kind of a pass-through for the city. We have no obligation to pay anything if any of these, any of the Benedictine living community has any failure in any way. So with that, I would offer a motion to approve resolution number R2018 oh, I'm sorry, we have the public hearing? Oh, let's start with
Point
that.
out that he's in a public hearing
Okay,
right now.
that's right, we're still public hearing, but,
Further questions
go ahead.
of legal counsel? If not, thank you. Other questions? Councillor Moko?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
This is a public hearing. Would anybody in the audience or residents like to come forward and make comment on this topic? This is a public hearing. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
No, you're up.
Councillor Lehman?
Seeing none, I'll make a motion to close the public
He
hearing.
beat you to it now.
I have a motion.
And a second.
Now I have a second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Councillor Whiting?
Well, our timing's a little off tonight, but we're gonna get this through, I promise you. I'd offer a motion for resolution number R2018-115, authorizing the issuance of revenue bonds of the city of Shakopee for the benefit of Benedictine Living Community of Shakopee LLC, adopting a housing program and authorizing the execution and delivery of revenue bonds and related documents.
Councillor Lewis?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion, I guess, I think this is a great development and a top-notch developer with the Benedictine health people coming to our community to offer this life cycle housing for the elders that is much needed in our community. Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, when this came forward last spring, I believe it was, I did visit a couple of their facilities, and as you said, they are top-notch. They do a very good job. I got a chance to speak to a couple of residents, and they're well satisfied with what the care they get. So I'm glad to have them come to our community.
Councillor Moko?
And I think that you can tell that we are excited to have you, so welcome.
Councillor Lehman?
Mayor, if I'm not mistaken, typically in the past, when Shakopee has used these types of revenue bonds, they're for projects that have a specific purpose. And one example, I think we used them on St. Francis Hospital when that first was built. And then the senior care and assisted living and what's the other one? St. Gert's Memory Care and I don't know what the other one is called.
Rehabilitation?
But at any rate, it's pretty much used for specific uses. It's just not your standalone restaurant or something. So,
Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving ahead, 8A1, 2019 proposed property tax levy, general fund budget, and debt levy cancellation. And Darren, share some good news with us, please.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Give me 1 second here. So I have a quick slideshow for you tonight. It's very similar to what the workshop was
2 weeks ago at our meeting, but I thought it would be another opportunity to explain to you and to the public kind of where our levy sits for this year at this point in time. Some good news. We have a good budget and a good levy to present to you tonight. But we do want to reiterate, we can only control some of the things that are in our box. So we have no ability to address valuation, the valuation of your property. That's obviously done by the county and such like that. We can't affect your school taxes or your county taxes or any of those special taxing jurisdictions that show up on your property tax statement. We can only control the city portion of your property tax. So we want to review kind of what the council's financial objectives are for 2018 or 2019. At the beginning of the year, it stated that the council wants to achieve low taxes, a continued financial stability, a stable tax rate, increased tax capacity, along with an increased bond rating. Then on top of that, from the administration point of view, we want to continue with our true fiscal transparency. We've been kind of in that 3-year process of revising our budget to make it a transparent and easily understandable, or more easily understandable than it was. And we really want to show how we actually spend those dollars. We don't want to make sure that we're being transparent and saying we're only taking in what we need to take in for our services to maintain that service level. So how did we do on those objectives for 2018? On the low taxes, your 2019 budget will actually decrease for an average valued home by $62, or about 7.2% for 2019. Continued financial stability. This budget is a direct reflection of those prior year efforts to right-size the government or right-size our city and to maintain the current service levels where we're at. Stable tax rate. This will be, 2019 will be the 3rd year of a trend of lowering our tax rate. And we're lowering it a couple percent this year. I think it's almost 2.5% or so. Increased tax capacity. We've had at least 3 years of significant growth in that 6 to 8% range, and 2019 is another year of that. And it's not only growth in valuation, but it's growth in new construction or new valuation that actually helps shrink the size of that pie or spread that pie out amongst more taxpayers and a bigger tax base. And then as far as our increased bond rating, we are setting the stage for that AAA. We will hopefully achieve that in the near future, probably in the 2019 area when we do look at issuing our next debt issuance on that end of it. But we're putting policies in place. We've got our financial history. We've got sound financial positioning. So I think we're setting ourselves up well for that next step into achieving that AAA bond rating. So just to quickly review the budget calendar, it's getting to be, or it is at least about a 3/4 of the year process to really look at the budget from beginning to the end. In July, we started out with, we reviewed our preliminary CIP, so we worked on that in the springtime and brought that forward to council. We did do some, Administrator Reynolds and I did a budget kickoff back in probably late May, early June, trying to look for some of that public input into the budget as well too. And so that kind of gives the public an opportunity to talk to us before we start really working on some of the details of the budget and such. So in September here, we are approving a preliminary levy. This preliminary levy is the maximum levy that we can approve. We can't increase the levy from this point on, but we can reduce the levy from this point on. But we need to do that by the end of September to certify that to the county. Then in November, that preliminary levy will go on to a truth and taxation statement that will be provided to all taxpayers within the city, and actually countywide for all the taxing jurisdictions. And that'll kind of indicate to the taxpayer what the tax impact of our preliminary levy is on their tax liability for the upcoming year. And then we'll work on looking at the specifics we'll bring the specifics of the budget back to the council in November, and then we'll hold a public hearing, or a public meeting technically, on December 4th, which will allow the public an opportunity to speak on the budget and the levy. And then we'll have the council look at approving the levy and budget at the December 18th meeting at that point. So just to reiterate, the public will have an official opportunity to discuss the the 2019 budget and levy at our public input meeting, and that will be held here at Shakopee City Hall, 45 Gorman Street, on Tuesday, December 6th at 7 p.m. So looking at our preliminary levy, for 2019, our preliminary levy is going to be about $19.2 million. And that's actually a decrease from 2018. So we're decreasing the levy about $30,000 over last year. So that will be a tax decrease to all residents. Not all residents, it's a tax decrease on our levy. It depends on your valuation of where things end up on that end of it. The Shakopee EDA special levy, that's $350,000. That's where we had set that aside last year, 2018, is kind of split that out to isolate and be more transparent on where those dollars are coming from and going to. And that levy will stay the same for 2019 as well. So you can see the bottom line, our total tax impact across both the city and the EDA is $19,580,500, which is a decrease, again, of just over $30,000 or 0.15%. There's a couple items to note on there. You can see the 2008 improvement bond under the debt service. That's a decrease of $135,000. That's a bond that is now paid off. And so that additional tax dollars that we have are rolled into the 2016 abatement bond. And that was all set up when we issued that 2016 bond back then, so we know that we had additional capacity.
Counselor Lehman?
What was the 08A bond for?
I do not recall offhand. It could have been
One of them.
a combination of I don't know if it was street improvement stuff or if it was public works potentially.
One of those two are for Public Works, I believe.
Public Works was built in what, 04, 06, 20 year?
Because the fire station was a couple years ago, I thought, that we paid off.
Oh, whatever.
But it could be that.
Look them up
it could
and
be
let us
that.
know, okay?
Yeah, I can shoot you an email on that one, so. So what's the impact of the budget on the levy request? As we mentioned before, it lowers the tax rate from 37.9% down to 35.2%. And what does does it have on residential homes? It'll have a decrease on the average valued home of about $62 or 7.2%. And that's with no valuation change. If your home valuation stays the same, that's what you can expect to see. But even with a home value increase of 0 to 5%, a taxpayer can assume that they will see a tax decrease of about $39 or 4.5%. And so really why that decrease is there, it's because there's a decrease in the levy and there's new growth within the city. There's that additional tax capacity from new growth that helps bring the taxes down for the rest of the taxpayers. And this is our third consecutive year that the levy will have basically a zero impact on taxpayers if your valuation, outside of any valuation changes. And it's also the third year of lowering our tax rate. And we can't say this enough, but really Shakopee is one of the lowest taxed communities in the metro. Our taxes are significantly lower than a lot of our comparable cities, along with all the cities in the metro area. And that's even looking at, you bring in some of your services as well. If you look at your utilities and costs and such, you get a good value for what your dollar is paying
Darren,
for here.
you showed us a slide here a couple weeks ago of proposed pending tax levies, and as we get near where communities set their preliminary levy, maximum preliminary levy, could we see that
Yep.
chart again of
Yep,
those
I
communities?
have that slide in here, and I'll
Yep.
hit it here in a minute, so.
Okay.
Yep. So we do have budget impacts this year. Obviously, we're a service organization, so personnel is a big driving cost for us. So that includes wages and benefits. So our COLA, our cost of average living increase, is projected to be about 3%, which is about $411,000. So that's a significant budget impact to us. Our health insurance, last year we experienced, I believe it was about a 19% increase in our health insurance. This year, we're actually projecting it's going to stay flat or actually even decrease. And that's really a swing of about $225,000 or $250,000 swing from one year to the next. So having that in place, that was beneficial this year. It was tough last year, but we were able to work our way through it, and thanks to the employees figuring out kind of what we need from an insurance standpoint, it helped us kind of manage that at that point. There was some legislative changes this year as well. The police and fire pension had some changes to it to help ensure the long-term viability of that pension plan. And so that has additional employee and employer contribution requirements to that, and that's about $41,000 a year. And then we do have one new position request, and that's within the Public Works Maintenance division, and specifically in the Streets division. We're seeing a need for that as our city is growing and expanding, that those street positions are being kind of pushed to the max, and we do have a need to maintain that service level with an additional position. The one nice thing about the Streets division is that a lot of their time is allocated out to the enterprise funds, our sewer and storm drainage utilities as well, and so part of their time is allocated to those divisions as well. So it really only has an impact of about a half-time employee to the general fund. So that's about $38,000 additional cost at that point. So then we have some other changes, including we don't have an election next year, so we'll have those salary savings next year as well too. So other impact issues, we have the internal rent charges. We talked a little bit or quite a bit about in our CIP process, along with at our workshop last meeting, about the need to incorporate some increases in our long-term equipment. Right now, we're charging that rent back based on the actual cost or the historical cost of that purchase. And what we're finding out is that these long-term equipment items, such as snow plows or fire engines, that are 15, 20-year items, we're only charging back probably 60% of what the cost is to replace those vehicles down the road and such. So we have a plan in place to kind of bring that back up and to account for the replacement value versus the historical value. And that's about, it's a 4-year implementation piece that we have, and that's about an additional $73,000, $74,000 for next year. On the revenue side of it, we're fortunate. Most of the time on the city government level, revenues are pretty stagnant, they're pretty flat, and property taxes are pretty much the only thing that really changes. Here, our building permits have been strong for the last couple years or several years, and we anticipate that to continue for at least next year and probably into the future on that. And what we have been doing in the past is that we've been ramping that budget up a little bit, but we're finding that we're still finding ourselves that we're under budgeting that to almost that ultra conservative level, and really we want to make sure that we're not ultra conservative, but we're conservative on that revenue estimate. We never know when the economy is going to turn and building permits dry up, but we want to make sure that we're putting in a realistic number so that we're not drawing additional tax dollars that we don't need to. And then obviously our community center ice arena, that's experiencing some good revenues as well too, and that helps offset some of their costs as well there too. So here is a graph from the county that provides the different valuation categories for all the properties, all the residential properties in the city of Shakopee. And on the far right, it shows what that valuation change is in average. It needs to be noted that every home is an individual valuation change. These are just averages, and so your home may or may not be what this average is for that price range. But you can see we're seeing that there's demand, or the market's causing those lower valued homes, those homes from $100,000 to $250,000 are increasing in value from 5 to 10% for this next year. Whereas the more expensive valued homes are increasing in about that 2 to 3.5% range or so on that end of it. And so really what that does then is it changes the piece of the pie. So that's what, when we levy a tax, we levy a specific dollar amount, and it gets broken out based on the tax capacity of each individual property within the city. But you can see on average that across the city, valuation went up about 5.3%. So here's what's going to happen to homes within kind of 3 different price points. If your home's valued at about $174,000, you're going to see an $11 increase. So why is that home seeing an $11 increase when we've been talking about tax decreases and we're decreasing our levy? It's because their value is going up higher than the average. So it's probably going up at that close to that 10% range.
Councilor Lehman?
The 174.3 example with the $11 increase, that's not taken in consideration the 10.5% valuation increase that was shown in the last slide.
It does, actually.
It does?
It does. I took it specifically, so when I grabbed those examples, I have a list from the county of every individual parcel. So I found a parcel that was in this so that $175,000 home is in this 8% range. I found a house or a home in that range that went an 8% increase from last year to this year. And this is what the taxes would be on it for the upcoming year and paid 2019.
Based off the increased value.
Based off the increased value, yes.
Okay.
So, but there again, every house is unique. So if your value didn't change, you're gonna see a tax decrease. But if your valuation went
More
greater than
8%.
10%, you're gonna see a higher amount. These are just the averages within those valuation ranges. So if your home's at about $255,000, there you saw that 5.3% increase, you're gonna see a $13 tax decrease. And then if your home's at $353,000 and your valuation went up, probably 3.3%, you're gonna see about a $48 tax decrease.
And the house, Darren, the house that you show in the middle is actually our Shakopee average house, is that correct?
It is our average house, and I
255?
yeah, and I did that at the 5.3% mark, or 5%. 5%, I think, on the nose there. So here's a graph of our tax capacity and our tax rate comparison. We talked about our tax capacity before. That's increasing based on both valuation and new construction. That helps bring down your tax rate. And obviously, as properties increase in value, and your levy about the same or less, your tax rate is going to come down naturally on that end of it. So here's a new slide I didn't have at our last workshop setting. I was able to get the preliminary levies of our comparable cities. These are the comparable cities that we set up a couple years ago that we've been trying to use on a consistent basis. I put them in from lowest to highest. So you can see we're on the far left, which is the good sign. So we're the minus 0.15%, and everybody else is in that kind of the 3 to 7 is the average in there. I think if I did the average, it was close to 5.5%, 6%, something like that.
Darren,
So
on this graph, our community stands out, obviously on this graph here with a tax cut that we should all be celebrating. What are these other communities, what are we doing right here in our community is that a combination of that rising tax capacity?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, it's not that we probably shouldn't compare as to whether we're doing something right or not right compared to other cities. I think each city has its own set of variables that will help determine this. So, don't want to.
Absolutely, and that's correct, Mr. Reynolds, that you don't necessarily know what their story is. They may have had a flat levy last year and now this year, or they have new construction going on or street reconstruction or whatnot, but it's something that people like to do is to compare and see how we're doing against our comparable cities. So,
Councilor Lewis?
Well, and as I look at this, you take St. Louis Park, they're landlocked, they're not going anywhere. They don't have all that new construction. A few of these others are probably in the same boat, so as Mr. Reynolds said, every scenario is different.
A little different.
and so here's that chart that the mayor was talking about earlier in the presentation that compares the annual cost of services. And this is the 2018 cost of services because I do not have updated numbers for utility rates and things like that for 2019 yet in there. Typically, when I've done this in the past for several years, cities typically do not move many positions. They usually stay pretty much where they're at. They may move one way or another one spot, but typically it stays in its current position pretty on a regular basis. So this is both our comparable and some of our surrounding cities as well too. So as you can see, we're pretty far on the left side there. Blaine was a comparable city in my previous city, and they were always the outlier on the far left as well too. And we kind of shook our head at them and didn't really understand what was going on there. So, and that continues to be the case to this day. So, other than that, this is really your utility costs, your sewer, your stormwater, and actually your water as well. The city obviously doesn't provide the water service, Shakopee Public Utilities does, but in order to compare ourselves to these other cities that typically do provide a water service, I did include that as well too, so. And here is our preliminary general fund budget. It's that high-level piece of that at this point in time. Once the preliminary levy is approved, departments will then have the latitude to be able to start working on the details of their budget. We've kind of sized it all for them, so they're kind of working with the items that we haven't calculated into the budget yet and such. So right now, our total revenues are about 26.9 million, with expenditures of about 27.1 million, and then we have a transfer in that we've done for several years of about $250,000. You can see our taxes line on the top is decreasing by about $375,000 or $325,000. A lot of that is due to the lodging tax. I mentioned this at our last meeting, that at the beginning of the year, we moved our lodging tax to a special revenue fund because it was kind of skewing our general fund, because it's basically money that comes in and then money that goes out to our Convention and Visitors Bureau on that end of it. So we've separated that and shown it will have its own fund for next year. And so that's why our taxes are decreasing more than that $30,000 that I had shown you previously.
Counselor Lehman?
Darren, under public safety, from 16 to 17, it was like a $400,000 increase. Then it was almost $1 million increase from 17 to 18, and now it's another 500,000. So in 2 years, we've got $2 million increase just in public safety. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, maybe, and I might be wrong here, but somewhere in there, I know we had separate fire and police, and somewhere we connected the two together.
Right, so in this public safety number here, this is the high level piece. So this combines basically police, fire, and actually building inspection as well too, because that, under our categories, building inspection is a public safety expenditure piece of that. So that's, all three of those are in there at this level. When we bring back the detailed budget, you'll see them split out in their individual departments.
Was that the same in 16?
Yes, yep, absolutely.
So
it doesn't, on $10 million, it doesn't
$2
take.
million in 2 years is,
Yeah, and I know they've had some, in 2016 we had, well, that was the Ryder Cup was here, so we had some additional private duty overtime.
that was
we had
covered
this-
with overtime that they reimbursed us for.
Yep, but we still showed the expenditure in this expenditure line.
Okay,
2018, we had the Super Bowl, those types of things. And when you add, 3% COLA on top of, probably a $6 or $7 million of salaries, it adds up pretty quickly on some of that.
And don't forget, at that
And that was
point,
just
we've also added some fire department staff, and we've also added at least 2, maybe 3 police officers.
Yes, we have 2 new police officers that started October 1st of
Yeah.
this year, so they'll be fully funded for next year. So that's one item that's about another $150,000 just to fully fund those between a quarter of a year and a full year and such, so. So again, this is just a preliminary levy. This is the maximum levy that can be levied. The final levy can be reduced, but it cannot be increased. In between now and that final levy, we'll be working on the details of the budget. We'll bring those back to you at a work session, probably in November timeframe. And before you tonight are resolutions to approve the preliminary levy and to cancel certain debt service levies. We've had sufficient fund balance in a couple debt service funds, and so each year we bring forward this resolution to reduce the levy that is required. Otherwise, the county has our bond issuance costs, and in there is a chart that shows exactly what we should levy. And so in order to reduce that levy, we need to have a resolution stating why, and that the council is aware of that levy reduction. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Questions? So with this tax cut, which obviously is great news for our community, when is the last time our community had a tax cut? Do we have any information? I was trying to reach back a while.
I think there was one, I thought there was one in like 2000, probably in the recessionary period, 2007, 2008. somewhere in that ballpark. I think there was one in that time frame.
Right at the beginning.
Right, and I don't quote me on which year that was, but I know there was one
Do you
back
remember,
at that
Counselor
point in
Lehman?
time.
I'd have to go on the website and look, I have it posted there.
All right.
Yeah,
Counselor?
and that would have been driven by the recession, which is
Right.
different than what we have here.
Right.
Property
This is
values.
This is essentially, you know, obviously, all communities that during the recession, when the property values dropped, had to then adjust their budgets. Here is the exact opposite. This is due in large part to the growth that we have been able to achieve, and again, as Darren had noted, growing that pie, making your individual slice of that pie smaller.
Counselor Whiting?
No, I wanted to mention the property value decrease in 2008, but I am excited to see an opportunity to lower our levy, and I think that's through great work from the staff. I know it's been a probably a 4-year process to get it all in place, but this is exciting. People should take a look at this and say, hey, we're doing a good job, but we don't really want to pat ourselves on the back. But it really has taken a lot of work, and staff has done a great job on this.
I think it's the council goals that have been in place for a long time, and just a combination of factors that obviously is a direct benefit to the taxpayers. Counselor Lehman?
I think it was 03, 04, and then the recession of 07,
Right.
08. So there was a couple in there. The ironic part of this is that the lower the value of the home, the bigger the hit. And it's just unfortunate. It's not our control, I get it.
That's a state issue.
Well, it's
It's a
a
market
valuation, it's a
valuation.
market forces issue. Because the demand for lower priced homes is higher than for the
Right.
real expensive houses. So if there's a high demand for something, there tends to push the price up, availability. So it's just unfortunate from that respect because the least are getting hit the hardest, and granted it's a small amount, but on the same token, I guess they get a little bit of equity too if their valuation goes up a little bit.
Well, Counselor Mokel?
I think it only helps to give our residents more options in housing, and I think that's what we've tried to do. And obviously through our leadership here, our staff has taken that on and done great things with it, and that's what we can be proud of.
Good. Counselor Whiting?
I would move to adopt resolution number R2018-110 and R2018-111, setting the proposed maximum 2018 property tax levy collectible in 2019 and canceling certain debt service levies for the taxes payable in 2019.
Counselor Lewis?
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the table. I think this is great news, as we've talked about, a lot of hard work, a lot of, baseline right-sizing our budget for our community along with the growth. And I think that's great, so. But with that, motion on the table, further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Thank you very much, Darren.
Congratulations.
Yeah. To all of us. Moving ahead then to 8A2, approval of the 2019-2023 capital improvement plan. Darren, welcome back.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Before you tonight is the CIP plan, or our capital improvement plan for 2019 through 2023. The council did review this with staff back in July, second meeting in July, I believe, somewhere in mid-July. So it's been a little while since we've looked at this. There was some feedback on a couple crucial items on that end of it that we've made changes to, but for the most part, it didn't change a whole lot, so I did not include the full CIP in your council packet tonight. But I did include the changes that were, a change sheet that shows all the changes that were made between now and that previous meeting. Just reviewing our CIP, in the past, this is the second year that we've had a standalone CIP. In the past, we combined it with the budget. Kind of with that change of a budget philosophy, or to be more transparent about it, we pulled the CIP out and really spent some time looking at that and planning for that, because there's a lot of projects in our CIP, and we get a lot of busy years in front of us. It really helps to help us visualize and vision and really see what we're going forward with. And capital projects, as you may know, take years to plan. We can be planning for, I was talking with Mr. Log this afternoon, and he's planning on a project now that's scheduled for 2021 that they're actively, kind of planning for and working on. And, I'm just working on the 2019 budget, and he's 2 or 3 years in front of me already on that end of it. So it takes a long time to plan this stuff, and we really need to make sure that we have it in front of us. So we look at our CIP projects and we prioritize them, and it's not a science, but it's just more of a feel thing. And we kind of prioritize them with the numbers 1, 2, and 3. And 1 is a public health, public safety, or a mandate type of project, and 2 is a maintenance or efficiency. So if we can increase the life, or if we can increase something from an efficiency standpoint, that would be categorized as a number 2. And then number 3 are those expanding existing systems, new services, or just general community betterment that are kind of on that wish list piece of it. So here was the schedule of the CIP. So we've been working on this since the spring, and we're bringing it now to fruition here. If the CIP is adopted tonight, all those CIP projects that are scheduled for 2019 will be brought forward into the 2019 budget. So when we review the budget in November, we'll have the capital project funds in there, and along with that will be all the projects from all of the 2019 CIP funds itself. So you get multiple times to see these, and I think it is beneficial because there's so much time in between some of this stuff. So it's a nice refresher to kind of see these projects making progress along the way as well. So just a summary of our expenditures of our total CIPs. You can see over the next 5 years, we have about $97 million in expenditures. Those aren't all tax dollars, and in fact, very little of it is actually tax dollars, but those are our projects, and so it takes a long time to plan that and to make it work and to make it all fit is the big problem, because you have multiple funding sources, you have different deadlines for grants, etc. To make all these projects work takes a lot of cooks in the kitchen, per se. And those were our expenditures. Here are all our funding sources. You can see we have a lot of our different funds are in here, such as our capital improvement fund, our park asset internal service fund, etc. But we also have cost sharing. So we have projects that we do with the county or MnDOT or with SPUC. We also have grants that we would get from DNR, per se, or the feds on that end of it as well too. One item you don't see in here is property taxes. Those are buried within the capital improvement fund itself. We actually have, it's only a few $100,000 that are actually go towards the capital improvement fund. That's one area we'll be kind of ramping up over the next couple years, incrementally on that end of it. But so you can see on $97 million of expenditures of projects, we really have only probably a couple $1 million of property taxes in there at the most at this point in time. So I did include, as I mentioned, there's a summary page in your packet tonight that includes all the changes that we made from the original draft CIP to this final CIP. And we did put page references in there, so if you have questions on any of that stuff, I'd be happy to answer that. Some of the major changes include, we'll just kind of point out a few here, and I did include some of the specific project pages for some of these major projects that we did have changes to. But one was the additional grant funding for the watershed district for the Ridge Creek Park Prior Lake Outlet Channel. There was some changing in funding. We got additional grant funding there from the watershed, so we were able to increase the funding there and reduce it out of the storm drainage fund. The Canterbury Commons project, we worked on that a lot this summer with our redevelopment agreement, and when that came forward, we were able to get better estimates in place at that point in time. So all those estimates for those different projects that are within that Canterbury Commons area have all been updated to account and to match up to that redevelopment agreement as well on how the different projects and what their budgets are for each area. We did have a cost share for County Road 42. There's a cost share increase of about $336,000, and that's dictated by the county on that, on how much that is. So we did make that adjustment in our capital improvement fund. Then lastly, there's the downtown there's a downtown project that includes some ADA improvements, some lighting, and some tree rehab that I know Mr. Lilhog had talked with the council about. It was in the CIP as a pending or a future project, but we did bring it back in and put a date to it. I think we have it in there as 2021 or 2020. At this point, those are some needed improvements that need to take place and that necessarily can't wait, 4, 5, 6 years, that we need to really start planning for those at this point in time. So be happy to discuss that in any further detail if you would like. And with that, this final CIP will replace the draft CIP on the city's website, so you can surely go to the finance webpage and we'll have the final CIP out there in the next day or so on that end of it. Again, the 2019 CIP projects will be brought forward into the final budget, so you'll see them for final approval in December. This is just a planning document. This isn't a budget. And then as the case with all contracts and such, when a contract, prior to letting the contract, we will bring anything above $25,000 to council for their approval, obviously. So a lot of these projects are above that $25,000 threshold, so you will see these at some point down the road again for letting of the contracts and contract approval and such. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Counselor Lehman.
Page 2, bottom right, 2023, ending balance, negative $2 million.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, that is negative, and our capital improvement fund we got a lot of stuff going through it in the next 4 or 5 years on that end of it. The one nice thing about it is that we do have positive balances going forward to that point in time. So 2023 is a ways out, so we'll have time to adjust and see where our actual projects come in. We'll have to make modifications if things aren't falling in line at that point in time. But we are also looking at bonding some of our street improvement projects down the road. For instance, we obviously have the Canterbury that we talked about that's kind of separate, but we'll have to look at bonding some of these street improvement projects that we haven't in the past, which is fine on that end of it. You cover the interest with the special assessments and such, but that's a piece of it. So,
Counselor Lehman.
Page 5, 2020, 2021 fund balance. Let's see, 2021 is negative 500,000, 400,000. 2020 is negative 750,000.
right, and that's why we look at the capital improvement funds over a 5-year time frame. Is that capital projects have big ups and downs, and that we look at getting those numbers through the end of it. And I'm sorry, the first page that you referenced was the Parks Reserve Fund, I believe, on that end of it. And there's one project in there that we need to, I believe like the Quarry Lake project is in that one, so we need to figure out where that's at this point in time. But
Well, that was my next question, because there's a whole page of to be determines with the cost to them on page 4. Are they included in these numbers, or would these to be determined additional to what's in the actual sheets?
if it's a pending project, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, pending projects are not in the specific year, so they'll show off to the side. So if you look at page 2, there's some future projects on the far right column there. That's where those pending ones would show up at, or those future projects.
So the negative 2 million would be worse by 6,200,000.
Right, and that's why they're out there as future projects, is we don't necessarily haven't identified a need for them yet, or haven't identified a revenue source or whatnot on those. So
The purpose of the planning document is to kind of point those things out that are possibilities into the future. If we do not have funding for any project, it either gets moved to a different year. There'll be a fluctuation, except for 2019. It'll either get moved to a different year, or it'll be dropped off in later variations. So, for example, I think one of the classic examples of that is the $500,000 ice warming house. which was kind of sitting out there for a while. Council looked at it 3 different times. So,
Right, right. And then we always have projects that pop up as well too, like the 17th Avenue
Yep.
Safety signals and stuff like that. That was a cost to our capital improvement fund. We're accounting for that, and we'll make adjustments to the CIP to make sure our balances need to be where they're at in the future on that end of it, so.
No, I share council members Lehman's concerns too on the fund balances, but I've been around long enough to understand the 5-year CIP, and 4 of those years are movable pieces for the most part, and
absolutely.
you know, those are part of the planning long-term, and I've seen them move around and get pushed, and for the most part, this is a document about 2019.
It is.
With a shadow plan for 4 more years.
And not a budget.
Right.
This is essentially a planning document. 2019 will then get kicked into the budget, and then everything else becomes a draft CIP, and then we'll kick it out another year, next year, and there will be movement, guaranteed movement between different years for these projects as we look at the next year's CIP.
CIP numbers are usually about as good. They'll be, if you approve it tonight, there'll be changes probably to amounts by tomorrow sometime. So I don't usually talk to Steve for a while on this one, because I don't want any changes for a while.
The reason I'm asking is because in the recent past, it's been pointed out that items that are in your CIP, there's a reasonable expectation by the general public that if it's in your CIP, that it's gonna get done. And, now I'm hearing that that's not necessarily the case, so it seems whenever it's convenient, it either is the case or it isn't the case. So what is the, Mr. Thompson, what's the facts there? If you have something in your CIP, is it a reasonable expectation that it has to get done?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, you're treading on thin ice here at me about, but let me say this. It's, the things that are in your next year's CIP are much more likely. The further out they go, each year they become more and more, I wouldn't want to say less likely, but other things happen. And so I think it's a common rule of thumb that things are like in the 5th year of your CIP, there's not much expectation that they will get done then. They could get moved up, but it's more speculative the further they get out.
Project could get changed?
It could get changed, or some other project could come in and bump it. It's like any other budget. The closer you are in time, the more reliable and predictable the information is.
Councilor Whiting?
I think you hit it on the head there. It's a planning document, and plans change. So we have to have the money to fund it. We have to decide if it's a need or a want, or if it's and there's a lot of projects that I've wanted to see get done, and they've been kind of, say it's been kicked down the road a little bit, but they may never happen. So, but 2019 tonight is what's moving forward.
Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, and as you said, it's a planning document, and the council pretty much regulates what's in that document, and as the council changes, that document's gonna change.
So projects that are to be determined are not actually in the document per se?
Correct.
They are the lights out there to say, these are possibilities for the future. Council, please recognize that these exist.
Markers in the
That's
future.
about it.
Okay.
And a lot of those are the planning, the park things, which we're taking a pause and having a big committee to look at those and determine the value of a want or a need and try to do that along the way. And then I'm sure some recommendations will come out of that, and then we would shore up our future years in our CIP because of that.
Well, part of that is that $2.5 million hurdle.
Yeah, if we don't have funding, it doesn't get built.
Right. Steve?
Mayor and council members, if I could add to it, looking at the the Capital Improvement Fund portion of it, last year there was $20+ million of projects that weren't even in there pertaining to the Canterbury project. So they're new projects. So they do vary. We also work with the county, so it depends on the county's CIP when we participate in their projects. But I would say when it comes to the city reconstruction projects, mill and overlay projects, They are a little more stable. We control them. We're looking at our pavement management. So when a resident looks at when is my street going to be reconstructed or mill and overlaid, we do stick with a pretty more stringent schedule on those. So that expectation is a little more reasonable than a lot of those other variable type of projects.
I think we had an example of the warming house, I guess one that comes to mind that's, you know, is the school crossings that all of a sudden got sped up. A year ago, it was being talked about and possibly on a phase plan with the county, and all of a sudden it's here all at once, and plus, by the way, here's the city portion, and we'll let you pay for it in 19. I can tell you for sure that project was not in the CIP last year, but yet now, all of a sudden went to the front of the line in 2019. And that number was close to 500,000, I believe.
Yeah.
Councilor Moko.
I think I agree that projects have changed, even in my short tenure. I mean, we moved up the Shakopee Avenue project. That was one that kept coming back to us that we just couldn't put off any longer. And then some other projects we did. And most of them tend to be park projects, but I think that we have a good plan to put our arms around what we were spending and what we really need here in the community. And I just think that this is what it is. It's a planning document. And with that, I'm going to make a motion to adopt the 2019-2023 capital improvement plan.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Whiting. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everybody. Moving ahead then to 8A3, refuge and recycling contract discussion. Nate, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Tonight's this agenda item is to get the council's direction related to the city's refuse and recycling contract with Republic Services. And the two recommendations that we do have in there for your consideration are to either direct staff to prepare to renegotiating our existing contract. We have to give notification by the end of November to renegotiate with Republic Services for up to 2 years, or to prepare a request for proposals to go out to the market and see if there's another vendor out there. If you chose the RFP option, kind of working backwards, we'd want to have somebody online by January or early February at the latest so that we could make the coordinated switchover happen as seamlessly as possible. So we would be issuing the RFP hopefully in October, probably reviewing early December and awarding in January or so. Big question is, what are the council's wishes? I can
Councilor
go
Lehman.
through a bit of a...
Mayor, regardless of which way the council goes on this, there's a couple of items that I wanted to talk about for either a change to an existing contract or something to put into a new RFP bid. One of them would be smaller recycle cart sizes for either singles or seniors. And the other would be smaller trucks for private roads in the city limits. We all heard the whole issue with that over and over and over. That's two that come right to mind when I read this. I don't know how we do that in existing. It's a good opportunity now because it could be worked into either the existing contract or it can be put into a future bid.
Okay.
I just happened to look at my mother as an example, who's got this one-size garbage can, the smallest one, and she's got
The
a bag.
smallest one is too big?
She's got a bag a week or something, you know, it's overkill. The recycle one.
Councilor Lehman, to a certain extent, the sizing of the receptacles is up to us. I noted in the bottom of the memo there that pretty much regardless of either direction, next month I'd hope to bring back a new order for new recycling and garbage carts, because back in 2013, the city ordered about 23,000, 24,000 garbage and recycling carts. Those are now all pretty much gone out there in the community, so we're going to need to restock and replenish.
I just gotta think there are a lot of seniors, whether it's one or two in older neighborhood housing and stuff, that they just don't produce a lot of garbage and recycle.
Counselor Lewis?
Nate, when you say they're gone, they are in use in the public or they were destroyed?
That's correct. They're in use, not destroyed. There have been some, but fortunately to this point, the vast majority of them have been warranty replaced. So we have roughly the same number of carts that we own now as we did when we purchased them. I would say I don't have an exact number on how many may have been destroyed and not warranty replaced, but it's not big.
Okay. And it's a good thing that the number we purchased is being used.
That is correct. At this point, Republic is actually using their own carts. I don't know if you've noticed, there are a couple of people out there in the community now that have a blue Republic cart, because we've gotten to the point where, for various reasons, we've gotten past, for those that want 95-gallon carts, we just don't have anymore.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Are they billing us for those carts, or how is that being
Not at
worked
this
out?
point, no, they're not.
Okay.
However, we're not, normally we make, I think it's a $2.17 per month cart fee or something along that line. We're not collecting that on those carts.
Okay, Counselor Whiting?
I agree with everything that's been said. I like the idea of having a different option for smaller size recycling carts. I would also like to see a few more recycling carts in the parks and things like that, so we have some options. I'm not sure how the city will handle that, but I think that's something that's out there. And I think it'd be a good negotiation topic to at least talk about, with either renegotiating or with a RFP for that smaller truck option. Or possibly work something out where, for other options for those smaller roads anyway.
Counselor Lewis?
Well, and I think we had discussed back when that came forward, was that if they would go in there with an empty truck, it wasn't so damaging. It's when they go in there midway through their route, when they're carrying a large amount of weight, that's where they're damaging those private roads. So it may be just part of the negotiation would be that they have to use an empty truck, be the beginning of their route.
Counselor Lehman?
Just want to clarify quick before it slips my mind. It's not necessarily that they're damaging the roads, it's that the roads that, being private, aren't necessarily built to a standard that the city might build them at.
Right.
So, there's been a lot of concerns about the customer service aspects.
That's what I was gonna bring.
And I'm not sure, I totally understand where Councilor Whiting is coming from, but I'm not sure that we can do a separate RFP in a closed system for a different company with a smaller truck to do just the private roads. I think,
That's not what I was suggesting.
Okay. So, I'm the question really before us in my mind is all these slight little changes that we're looking for, and do we want to negotiate with the existing company that we have, or do we want to put these changes into a bid and rebid it?
Yeah. Counselor Walco?
Well, I guess I'm just gonna be bold. I think that we should do an RFP. I don't think that competition hurts anything. I also believe that when I'm looking at the RFP, that the past one, the things that I would add to that would not just be, the smaller truck, but actually having them put in here what their process is for escalation of further customer service. I don't think that harms us at all, to make sure that we have a clear process and what they need to follow when there are complaints, and that we know that.
Counselor Whiting?
I would disagree. I think there have been a few customer service complaints. I think they, for the most part, have been resolved or have been worked on. There's always going to be some customer service issues. I would think we'd be in a better position to renegotiate with our existing hauler.
Counselor Lehman?
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we renegotiate it, we could re-extend the existing contract to 2 years, twice.
That is correct.
Now, when you say existing contract, does that mean that some of these changes we're talking about can't be altered?
Mr. Mayor and Councilor Lehman, the language in the contract is specific to renegotiating terms of the contract. So if we wanted to attempt to renegotiate some of these things into the contract for a 2-year extension, we are allowed to do so.
Okay,
So we can negotiate.
okay.
So, Counselor, did you have more, Counselor Lehman?
I just have one other thought. What would if we went out for bids and RFPs, what length of a contract would we be looking for? Wasn't this one a 5-year?
Councilor Lehman, that's correct. This was 5 years with the 2-year extensions potential.
So we would be looking at another 5 years.
I'd advise council that that's probably a good length, but I think that you're going to have a hard time settling into a routine in a shorter period of time, and I'd imagine evaluating an RFP is going to be kind of an extensive process. So,
Counselor Lewis?
Nathan, can you give me a downside to going out to RFP? I mean, never hurts to ask, to get bids, but not that I'm seeing. I mean,
I don't, the part of the reason why I threw both of these up here is because to me it is almost 6 of one, half dozen of the other. If I'm looking into a crystal ball just a little bit, I think that no matter how you look at going forward in terms of pricing, you're going to see price increases with just about anybody. Simple fact of the matter is recycling revenues are down. We're disposing of more recycling than ever before, which ends up bringing your costs up and things like that. So from a cost perspective, to me, there isn't a downside, but there's probably not much of an upside either. From a customer service perspective, I get about a call a week on average. On an average week, right? We had kind of a little bit of an issue back in December and January, but I get about a call a week on average for a customer service issue. And particularly in the last 8 months or so, Republic has resolved, I would say, 95 to 99% of those within 24 hours. It happens pretty quickly. We're definitely getting better on that front with them.
Yeah.
If you would have asked me 8 months ago what my recommendation would be, it would have been 100% to the RFP, but at this point, things have gotten better.
Counselor Lewis?
have things gotten better because they know the end of their contract's coming up and they want to make sure they got a better leg up. The other point would be, do we have any records of what the complaints were with our previous hauler?
Mr. Mayor and Councilor Lewis, I do have some records going back into that time frame. I don't know exactly how accurate they are. I have looked at them. I will say, with all due respect to all haulers out there, that just based on appearances and not having been here at that point in time, it seems fairly comparable. I mean, when you have roughly 12,000 or so pickups every week, and you're getting one customer service call that's escalated to me, and then I do get a report that that we typically get at the end of the year. It's about a 4% customer service call rate in total, and then a much less than 1% escalation rate to me that I actually document.
Councilor Lehman?
Well, we also had a billing problem,
Yeah.
not just a overall customer service issues. Whether it's a computer glitch or whatever, I mean, it's kind of a serious issue in my mind. I'm kind of leaning toward putting together an RFP. The company we currently have certainly is capable to respond to that, like any other company. I think what's more important to me is A, the competitiveness, B, to be able to put any changes that we want into it and let them all have the same opportunity on them changes instead of just one. So,
Councilor Whiting?
And they could, our current hauler could respond to an RFP, but my concern is if we find another hauler that has a better price, whatever, we're gonna have to retrain those drivers. There's a lot of issues on hiring drivers. I can just foresee a big issue with a lot more customer service issues if we do change. It seems a little easier to me to be in a better position to renegotiate with a company that knows what they have, that we're selling, or what the routes are and the things that they need to do. So that's my position.
Mr. Reynolds?
Mayor, members of council, I think that is the one area of concern that staff has, is that if we were to bring something forward, it would have to be a significantly better deal based upon the angst of switching to our customers, our residents. You know, we would analyze any RFPs, obviously, and we would take a look at that. And it could be that whatever value added just simply wouldn't be worth that transition period that, you know, will be, I mean, that's going to be an issue. And the key is how we manage that and make sure that the impact is as small as possible to our residents. But that is probably the one concern that we have as a staff.
Let's hear from the city attorney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, just kind of following up on what the city administrator just said. Yes, this is just an RFP, but it's a very, very complicated RFP process. It's very involved. Takes a lot of time, staff time. Last time, I don't know what staff's intention is this time around, but last time there was a consultant retained, and he had a lot of time on this. It is a very, very time-consuming RFP process for your staff. I just wanted to point that out so you understood that. So go into it with your eyes open if you decide to go that way. You certainly can go that way, and it's not a problem, but it is very time-consuming.
Okay. So I guess the way I feel about it, I agree that if we were to go to out for bid, you know, there's that challenge of change if that were to occur, which I've watched our community over the years. We do have an opportunity to renegotiate with our current provider, but I think as it's been spoken, there's been some bumps in the road. I do know they have a new point person that have picked up the pieces here, but the billing error, the customer service, the no outlet for an opportunity for a smaller truck in some areas, competitive pricing, and the customer service. You know, we talked about carts and wanting smaller carts. Previous council made a decision that we are now, as a city, in the cart ownership business. So to ask a hauler we want smaller cart, we're the owner of that, and you know, we would have to expend dollars to provide smaller carts, and there is a request here of which that can do, and we can get to that. I don't know if we could go and negotiate with our current hauler for a period of time and then get some base information and then come back and make a further decision on what you want to do before the deadline. But I know the last couple times we've gone out for RFP, I will agree that it was a copious effort on staff's effort to go forward.
Mr. Mayor, I guess I'd ask Mr. Thompson if it's advisable or legal for us to begin negotiating with Republic, see what we can get to, and then bring back an RFP. Okay. If we're not getting far enough.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Mayor, that's certainly an option. And Nate, if I'm understanding this correctly from looking at the agreement, we do have to give notice of our intent to extend, if I'm doing the math right here, it's
by the end of November.
December 1st, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so it'll be November. So you got a little time here, but not a lot of time.
No, I see that. All right.
And furthermore, Mr. Mayor and council members, if we did do an RFP, you really need to have them on no later than February so we can transition as quickly as possible. So we could take a small window here and see what we can get to with Republic, and then.
So now.
Okay, let's just, Kathy, RFP or negotiate for a short period of time?
I would do the negotiate for a short period.
Okay. Councilman?
Negotiate.
Councilman?
Well, if we're going to negotiate, when you say short period, I'm thinking we're negotiating for a 2-year extension.
Oh, it is, but we have a short window to
negotiate.
right.
Right, okay.
Right. Okay.
But the question I have, Mayor, is what exactly are we negotiating? Are we adding in the customer service flow chart, if you will, that Councilor Mokel's talking about, and possibly a smaller truck or empty trucks on private streets or something?
Some relief on that issue.
Yep. And maybe the only available option for them is an empty truck or
Right.
something, whatever. And then the cart issue is a city issue.
We'll get to that when we're.
Okay.
Okay,
So, yeah,
so
that's fine.
short-term negotiation
Yep.
before we, okay.
Yep.
Counselor Lewis?
Yeah, we all went through this when it changed, well, I guess you weren't here, but the rest of us were here when we changed over the last time. And, yeah, on the portion for the citizens, I mean, there's a lot of angst with, you know, they just fear going to a change. And it was a big change the last time because we ended up buying the carts and now, you know, we're the owners of the carts and, you know, and I think we can negotiate with this company because, you know, the trash business is very competitive. I mean, if they want to keep us, they're gonna negotiate. So, I would say do the negotiation first, and if, you know, if they're not gonna come around to give us anything, then, you know, we can put it out.
Enough direction on consensus, Nate?
Just to clarify then, Mr. Mayor, what I'm hearing is maybe until the third week in October, we can work on trying to come some sort of agreement with Republic, and if that's not fruitful, then we'll bring back issuance of an RFP. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay.
Wait, now, there is a ask of these carts and, you know, up to 2,500. Do we need action on that tonight? I mean,
Not
you say
today.
that we're using Republic's carts?
Not
What-
today, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to give you a heads up that it's coming, so it's not a surprise when it does. At this point, I actually am looking at the potential of changing our cart vendor. There are about 4 or 5 different vendors out there. I've actually got some back here in the mechanical room for us to take a look at and see, because we had some issues early on with the
Trash
carts
cart
that we
tour.
chose, with the wheels falling off. As I understand, as they've replaced the wheels, it's gotten better because they redesigned their wheels. But I thought it was prudent to take a look at some other cart options, maybe even colors, because, and I might have to ask some folks that were around at that point in time, because it's an extra like $2 a cart or something to that effect to do the yellow tops. Yellow is a special color in plastics, so we'll have to take a look at what the best
Okay.
deal and best option for the city going
Bring
forward
that
is.
back. So is that in the CIP for 2019?
No,
that-
that is not in
that
the capital
expense, so
improvement plan.
Another moving target, but I know there's good carts and there's not so good carts, and I don't think we should be in the cart business,
Is there
but
a
we are.
used cart market?
Huh?
No used cart market?
But, all right, enough direction on this topic for now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Take your break, it's almost time.
Do you want to get through with this? Do you want to take a break?
Whatever.
Counselor Whiting?
I'll make a motion for a 10-minute recess.
I have a motion and a second for recess, no further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Since I've never
Oh,
done that.
what? let's return to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for September 18th, 2018. And we are on 8A5. Let's get after this. A TIF, fact versus fiction. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Michael and I are going to tag team this a little bit just to start out with. This kind of builds on our October workshop that we had where we talked about TIF, but it's clear to me that we need more discussion about TIFs in general. As a reminder, you know, we had that October workshop. We also annually bring our TIFs here to council because we have a state requirement to have those information to the state, and what we've done since I've been here is to use that as an opportunity to bring those forward and review the active TIFs with you. We've never really looked at our old TIFs or the ones that are closed in too much detail, and we really never talked about the history in Minnesota and the history with Shakopee in regards to TIFs either. I had the opportunity to have a conversation with someone running for a local office, and it was clear that we have not, as a staff, done enough to explain what TIF is and what TIF isn't. Because after that conversation, it was clear that there's still a lot of misunderstanding, and especially what Minnesota does and what we do in general. So to that end, we're going to kind of have what I hope is a discussion more than Michael and I talking amongst ourselves in regards to it. There's actually a very interesting Lincoln Institute of Land Policy report, Improving Tax Increment Financing for Economic Development report that just came out that is really good in talking about TIFs. What it does is that, and we'll get into this in a little more detail in a few minutes, but it notes that all TIFs are not created equal because not all states even do TIFs the same way. It's very difficult to look at something like California, who essentially started the TIF movement and then over-TIFed to the point, especially after Proposition 13, as the report points out, started using TIF almost as a way to attack other people's jurisdictions to try to garner tax dollars. Totally inappropriate use of TIF and not something that is even allowed in California anymore. The other interesting set of facts that they point out is what Chicago apparently does, and you know, let's just say Chicago is probably not the best city to look at in regards to openness and transparency, and they point that out as well, that Chicago has a terrible record when it comes to that. Not only do we have our annual reports that we bring forward to you, but we also have the state, and we'll get into those numbers in a few minutes, that also has those TIFs reported to them and are regulated by them. So I did take, to start off here, there are a couple quotes that I wanted to take out of this particular report, and it's basically laying the groundwork for everything that we're going to talk about here. As it notes in the report, a community success also requires regularly revitalized community activity, the maintenance and renewal of infrastructure, and the provision of public goods, buildings, and services like police, schools, hospitals, and public recreation areas. Part of the pieces of that is the community's economic growth. That's actually your tax cut that you're getting this year is a direct effect from that. Obviously, economic growth is an important government function that requires coordination with the private sector. When impediments arise, they can often be remediated by a combination of private sector and government activity, and this is essentially what we're talking about with TIFs. It's a public-private partnership to try to address some fundamental issues with particular land or pieces of land. The system operates best when government and private sector actors work in harmony to achieve compatible goals by using their own tools, and TIF can provide a framework for that cooperation. Now, what that report will also talk about is what a TIF isn't, what it shouldn't be doing, and you know, all the things that can go wrong when TIF is not, frankly, regulated properly. So what is tax increment financing? Essentially, it's in itself is a simple concept, but it's extremely difficult to understand with all of the historical changes that have come over the years, and also the comparison between different states and what Minnesota does. It sets aside, I think you're on the wrong, or did I miss one? Oh, sorry. Going back to the Minnesota, not all TIFs are created equal. They are a product of the particular state. They are a state entity. They have a state purpose. They have a state backing. That's how they become. 49 states currently use TIFs with different rules and regulations and regarding those, and one state does not. I don't know which state. Do you know which state does not?
California.
Arizona.
Arizona, okay. Some use liberally, others constrict their use. Minnesota, if you'll look in that report specifically, Minnesota has among the least amount of types of TIFs that are available. And you know, there are other states that have all kinds of things that can be TIFed. For Minnesota, TIFs now have two basic purposes, and this is after the changes, tax changes of 2000, Michael? 2001. TIFs before 2001 had a different rule book. Afterwards, when the tax code changes were brought forth through the state, the TIF laws were also adjusted. At this point, they moved development forward that otherwise would not occur for a but-for test. In other words, but for the TIF, this would not happen. And the other piece, and the piece that we frankly rely on more than anything else in the city of Shakopee, is they finance public infrastructure related to development. As I said before, a TIF is a simple concept that, because of the different rules and how we do it in Minnesota, can have all kinds of variations and can be, even between communities. For example, in Shakopee, we're even more restrictive than the state in what we do. But essentially what it is, it's setting aside future taxes. And that is the increase in taxes generated by new development, and then we set that aside and we dedicate it to pay the costs related to development. And specifically for the city of Shakopee, we really focus on infrastructure, land acquisition, and remediation costs. It's important to understand that these taxes are still paid. These taxes they don't go away, they are still paid. The government, or excuse me, the private entities still pay these taxes. And they also still pay voter-approved levies and other local levies. For example, the school levy for the high school and the other construction that took place, they still fully pay those levies. So when we look at TIF as a tool for redevelopment, it's not the only tool that's out there, but it is a significant one. And as I've said before, redevelopment is very different than development. Development, when you have a clean piece of land, for example, what we're doing out in the west part of town, it's relatively easy to go in there, scrape the ground, put in some pipe, and build something on top of it. Redevelopment is significantly different. And one of the things that we brought Mr. Kursky in for specifically is because he had a background in redevelopment, and it became clear that we were going to need that background because we were extremely good in the past at development because we had done so much of it. But we really hadn't done much redevelopment, and that was the skill set that Michael brought forth. So essentially, through that redevelopment process, there are a lot of ways to try to, as opposed to having that pristine piece of farmland, for example, how do we build a parcel? How do we clean it up? How do we demo buildings that are possibly on it, and how do we prep it to make it as close to a buildable a parcel as possible? That all takes money. Again, as I stated, the one way to address that is through a TIF, which is a public-private partnership in which developers invest in the real estate while the city assists with property assembly, cleanup, and infrastructure costs. This adds value in the community through employment, greater amenities, and more housing, recreation, dining, and shopping opportunities. As we look specifically to Minnesota, TIFs in Minnesota have been around since the 1960s. Actually, the first one occurred in '69. Our first TIF, TIF number 1, which we'll talk about in a little more detail, was the Kmart Distribution Center, and that was pre-1977. And that was under the old statute. That was before the new rules that popped in 2001. Under that old statutes, it was used for economic development, redevelopment, senior affordable housing infrastructure costs. And it was really amazing what TIF number 1 did for this community under the old rules. I thought it was important to point out what did that TIF, what did that fund? And we'll talk about the numbers in a few minutes. And here's the list: a water tower, well, and water main, upgrade to County Road 83 twice, Highway 101 intersections, upgrading to our railroad crossings, our downtown streetscape, the Upper Valley Drainage Way, the South Bypass, the Mini Bypass, the Chaska Sewer Interceptor, portions of the Community Center, the acquisitions of Block 3 and Block 4, where River City Center is now, downtown alley improvements, the Upper Valley RAR Sewer line, and Schlepper Stadium.
Wow.
That is from TIF number 1.
And I would add, so
What was the outline of TIF number 1?
it was basically most of the city that existed in that time. So Mr. Reynolds mentioned there's been some significant changes in the Minnesota tax law. So prior to 2001, you could do a huge district like most of the city, and back then, commercial property paid a much higher tax rate. So the Kmart Distribution Center was paying well over $1 million a year. That project generated $30 million in TIF revenue during its time period. So that $30 million, as Mr. Reynolds pointed out, went into all these other things. The law has changed significantly, so I got to review every single TIF as part of this. So we have lots of old binders with all these records, lots of stuff on Laserfiche, and I think this was a good kind of review of what's been used in the past. But also, we're going to take that information and put it up on our website so people can see all the way from number 1 down to the current ones, all the TIF plans that we have and what they were used for and when they will expire, so that the public understands what TIF really is about. But that's changed significantly. As we go through them, you'll see it went from districts to basically, one of the reasons why Minnesota has a lot of TIF districts is today they're typically one property. So I mean, Canterbury is a little unusual in that it's basically all the property owned by one owner, but typically it's the old City Hall site. It's one particular site. In the old days, it was blocks and blocks. Areas that's not used anymore in Minnesota. A lot of the examples cited in the study that Mr. Reynolds talked about, the districts are really pretty large, and Darren and I were talking over the past couple of days. One of the unusual quirks in Minnesota is that the city council comes up with staff with the budget, you tax based on that budget. Other places have a mill rate, and so the mill rate they can say has stayed the same for 20 years or 15 years, but they don't mention that there's been all this other growth going into that mill rate. And when you have a TIF with a mill rate, it picks up maybe 2 or 3 square miles of new growth that goes into that TIF. I mean, in South Carolina, the downtown TIFs that we did were 2 square miles and generated $3 to $4 million a year. You don't really have that anymore in Minnesota. The largest TIF that we have, and you'll see some numbers from the state in a second, are things like the Mall of America. That is probably the largest TIF in the state, and you'll see it skews the numbers considerably because it's considered one of the Twin City urbanized TIFs, and it generates a lot of money. So these are the types of districts and durations. These come from the state auditor's office. These are directly from them. They provided these to us. So Minnesota now allows a redevelopment TIF, which is 25 years, 26 years of increment. Housing, 25 years, 26 years of increment. Economic development, 8 years with 9 years of increment. Renewal and renovation, which we really haven't seen very much in Shakopee, which is 15 years. And the soils condition, which is 20 years with 21 years of increment. Other types are the pre-1979 districts, like the one we just talked about, the Kmart district, the uncodified law districts, and then the hazardous substance districts. Those aren't around anymore. You'll see that we had some of those, and they've been decertified. So these are 2016 reported data. So you can see redevelopment's probably the most popular in the state. These are the statewide numbers. They're 48%, $162.2 million in revenue from those districts. And then going down, housing is the second largest, economic development third, and it rapidly gets down to soils condition. There's only 10 currently in the state. It's less than 1%. And then you can see the pre-1979 are all been decertified. There were 2 that reported, and then the uncodified ones, which are in other parts of the state under different laws. So this is the interesting thing. So the metro area has 614 TIFs. Greater Minnesota, so that's every other town, entity, county in the state, has 1,051 outside of the metro area. So you can see 37% in the metro, 63% in Greater Minnesota, but you can see the flip in the revenue. So the metro TIFs are 85% of the revenue, and Greater Minnesota is only 15%. If you divide that 1,051 into the 31 million, you'll see a lot of small towns doing TIFs for $20,000 or $30,000, whereas here you're seeing TIFs anywhere from the hundreds of thousands into the millions, and things like the Mall of America in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So, quick history of Minnesota, 1940s, the language was enacted. 69 to 74, we had the various TIF statutes and usage spread. 79, there was actually the TIF Act, which created a uniform process, and there was a rapid growth because of that. 1988 through 1990, there were reforms and controls because, quite frankly, places like Shakopee were taking one building, taking all that revenue and doing projects throughout the city instead of in specific areas. So $30 million plus from one building got spent throughout the city. Through the 1990s, there were additional changes and controls. 2001, as Mr. Reynolds mentioned, was the big change. That was the tax reform, which not only changed how properties were taxed, but also changed how TIFs were used. So since then, there's just been some fine-tuning through the years by the legislature. So here's another great diagram. You can see the blue line is the number, the dashed blue line is the number of districts. So the districts have been declining over time. And then the green line is the revenues. So you can see as we headed into the recession, the numbers changed and they've gone down considerably since. So recent law changes where you've seen this here, the interfund loans that allow us to borrow internally to do projects. Terms can be modified. They can structure as a drawdown or line of credit. This is being used significantly in some of our suburban neighbors. Edina, I was looking through their website. They made a zero interest loan to the Simon Company for $5 million to try and help turn Southdale Mall around. That's why you've seen a lot of infrastructure changes there. There's a bunch of new buildings kind of on the perimeter. Edina's been paying for the infrastructure to get those parcels. There was not sewer or water kind of laid out into those parking lots. But they've seen that mall is a big investment. It's a huge property tax generator. If it should fail or significantly decrease in value, it's going to impact all the taxpayers. This is another change, economic development districts for workforce housing. It's a workforce housing, as you know, is a big issue. That is one what county and school districts must approve. That's a very special district. And Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has changed their program incomes to try and make more workforce housing available through TIF. So again, this will show you the chart over time. So the red line are decertifications, so those are districts coming offline. And the green line are new certifications. So again, it's really pretty much of a flat line for new districts, and you can see the number of districts getting decertified has increased. So this is a really interesting chart that shows full duration versus early decertification from 2012 to 2016. So redevelopment districts, as we talked, are 25 years. 323 of those have come offline. Only 49% have lasted that 25 years. So 51% have been decertified early, and the average number of years is 11. That's because when you've seen those TIF plans, we do not include any increase in valuation. So there's no inflation built into them. Because of that, they tend to retire sooner. So housing are 25 years. Their average length right now has been 12. Economic development, 8 years. 23% of those decertified early. Renewal and renovation, we don't really have any of those. And soil conditions, you can see they are kind of the unicorn of TIF districts. We will have one. There were 2 decertified and 17
Michael,
ended early.
when I saw this data, last month from the state. Of all these slides, this is probably the one that I feel caught my eye the most, because we talk about the duration of 20 years and, oh my gosh, the length of 25 years, and this one about showing all the districts with the average on redevelopment at 11, meaning the development outperforms the TIF aspect, in with housing with 12, and actually economic development, even a shorter time on that. It was just amazing. So you set out the max time, but a majority of these really get decertified faster now.
And that's an important piece, Mr. Mayor, because one of the things that this report I had mentioned earlier had talked about is that some states do not take it, or take it automatically into consideration the effects of inflation, and Minnesota does not. So that makes us a little more conservative when we're looking at TIFs, and that's probably has some reason for having some of these decertified early, because we are looking at it an increased valuation as well. We're looking at it very ultra conservatively, which some states do not.
And Mayor and Council, the other big thing is that some states allow you, so if you had a 25-year TIF, you get the full 25-year, whatever that value is.
Yep,
we
correct.
have a TIF plan that says you will get this in present value, and this is how we calculated it. Once you reach that number, we're done.
It's over, right. Councilor Lyman?
Mayor, if I'm reading this right, 50% of redevelopment go the full 25 years, and 77% of economic development go the full 8 years.
Well,
Correct.
51% decertify early
Right, so
of
the,
that 11.
so the other 50% goes the whole distance.
Well, I said a majority, 51%, housing 81, and we say economic development, 23 may be a low number, but I'm looking at the average years of decertification is 3. To me, that tells me the economic value and stop out of the TIF.
That's 3 of 23%,
Right.
not of the 77, because the 77 went the full duration. Okay?
But the average years.
Average years is of the ones that decertified early, which is less than a quarter of them.
Okay.
Okay? And the other point about the valuation is when you put a TIF on a property, even if it's a blank property, there's a value currently paying taxes on that property. That value is froze for the length of the TIF district on that property. So when we saw our budget tax slide, we're showing that the lower priced houses are going up in value by 10%. If it's 10% each year over 25 years for them houses, their taxes they're paying more and more and more because their value is going up and up, up and up. These properties that are what you're currently getting stays the same because they're not, that value's not getting upped each year.
But that value is retiring the TIF quicker. So it's not, and again, you'll see in a second when I show you the numbers, these districts, the amount of taxes they pay, some of them are huge to this community. And as that number increases, the length of that term shrinks. So if we say it's 25 years based on that value, so say a property is worth $10,000 and when it's done it's worth $10 million, we're only getting the $10,000 in value, but they're paying their full taxes. We get our $10,000 in value, but the difference, if it increases over time, retires that TIF quicker.
I understand that, but what I'm pointing out is that there's no increase in valuation on the $10,000 or the investment until after the TIF district expires.
Well, Councilor
You're getting the
Lewis?
value of the improvement.
Right.
The value of the improvement goes up over time.
Yep.
Councilor Lewis?
By retiring it early, though, you're getting that higher value of, say, 12 years of increases paid at 12 years. You're not waiting the 25 years.
Yep, I get it.
But if you would increase that base price each year, you're gonna make those years go out further. So the way they're doing it here by retiring them early is more beneficial to the city.
And again, that was one of the things that this report had pointed out, that a lot of states don't do that. They don't, the impact of Minnesota doing it is that decertification early.
Yeah. Councilor Mokel?
And I think that it's to keep in mind that this is the greater Minnesota. I mean, with
This
these
is all of
numbers,
Minnesota.
but these numbers would be different if it was Shakopee's numbers, where we're seeing the
Mayor and
different
Council, you'll see in a
evaluations.
second some of the
Yeah.
TIFs that we've had.
Continue.
So Shakopee TIFs improvements and expenses in Minnesota can be funded by, as we've mentioned, pay-as-you-go notes, known as a pay-go, revenue bonds or notes, general obligation bonds, or interfund loans. Those are the ways that you can pay.
Can you talk a little more about PayGo?
So a pay-go basically is we establish the present value. You, as the property owner, have to go out and borrow those improvement costs. And as that revenue comes in, and if that revenue comes in, you get paid back. And the state sets the interest rate based on, excuse me, on a regular basis. Right now, it's 5%. In the past, it's been 6 or 7%, depends on what the markets are doing. It's been low over the past few years because interest rates have been low.
Hasn't this been an issue with some of these other problem areas that have used TIF? Now that, hasn't the PayGo policy always been, maybe not Minnesota, but Shakopee's always done the PayGo?
You'll see our early TIFs were not pay-go. We actually, the city through bonding and other borrowing was actively involved in TIFs. The city bought property, tore buildings down, paid for grading, prep sites for people. I mean, this has been going on since the late 1970s.
But our modern ones, the ones we've done in the past 15 years?
Yeah, I have every one of them, and you will see
Okay.
every one of
All
them,
right.
sir.
Counselor Lehman?
This revenue bonds, the general obligation bonds, I understand, are taxpayer-backed. We did revenue bonds for Benedictine tonight that are not backed by the taxpayers. Why don't we see revenue bonds usage in TIF? It's listed here, but I don't think I've ever seen that.
Mayor and council, you can. So you can do a TIF bond that does not have the backing of the full faith and credit of the city. It's riskier, it'll have a higher interest rate because it doesn't have the full faith and credit. It's based purely on the revenues. So while Benedictine Health Systems will get a good rate, they're a huge nonprofit corporation basically that has a long standing in the community. If you are a bond buyer buying for a piece of real estate out on Highway 101 and you're only gonna get your guarantee was based on their real estate increment, it's got a higher risk and will carry a higher interest rate. That's why you don't see it as much. Most of the communities have done TIF bonds that also have a GO backstop on them.
Continue.
So improvements and expenses in Minnesota can be funded, as I said, and today most of the city of Shakopee TIF districts are pay-go, so the developer pays its expenses up front. They reimburse through TIF payments twice a year by a note at state-regulated interest rates. They don't always get fully reimbursed, and sometimes they pay off early. So, TIF District Number 1, Kmart Distribution Center, 1976. This is the value today, $22,583,000. It pays $797,002 in total taxes, of which $103,312 of that comes back directly to the city. That's after they paid $30 million in other stuff in the city.
The list that you showed was
Yes.
$30 million.
It was a big list. That's the old
No, right.
districts.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How did they pay $30 million on a $22 million asset?
So
And that's the asset value of today.
this is the value of today. So mayor and council, that building has aged out. It was a bigger building and the tax rates were much different back in the 70s. So if you look way back in tax rates, they were actually much higher. And if going through all the tax bills for these, it was interesting to see some of these buildings were pre-2001 were $1 million plus a year. And in 2001, they changed and the fiscal disparities bills got bigger and then the state tax, which is now your school tax, got really large. And so there was a whole bunch of taxes that were all moved around and that's when changes.
So that 30 million was the taxes they would have paid over 25 years?
Before my time, sir, but
Yeah.
yes, I believe it was 25
But the
years.
community got the
Okay.
benefit of that list of things
Well,
that we didn't have to bond
And
for.
that's what I was gonna point out. The community list of benefits was spread all over the community, where today, the benefits are site-specific.
And that's a requirement of the state law.
But,
And the-
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, too, that would have been the district-wide, so it wasn't
Right,
just
right,
specifically the
right.
Kmart Center,
District-
it was the TIF district, which was a bigger overlay
Right.
area, which
Much bigger.
generated that 30
They
million as
tightened
well.
up all the rules, but I just find it, when I have done this, and I know Kmart was our very first, and, you know, back when they started, they were the one of the top retailers in our nation. And to get a regional distribution facility was a big deal. All the jobs, all the opportunity in our community, and we tipped that to bring them in. They served our community well, $30 million worth of value of infrastructure type items into our community. Of course, now, different era. Kmart is very close to out of business, but the building continues, and the building is free-flowing taxes and has for a lot of years. Fast forward to several years ago where we got the #1 online retailer to come here, build a regional distribution facility. There were some TIF that's gonna provide a public infrastructure benefit. I believe that'll be decertified early as well.
And Mayor, to Council Lehman's point, I mean, today the districts have to serve either that property or right around them. In the past, this Kmart served the entire community. The laws have changed. The difference is, as you said, Kmart, most people don't even know what Kmart is anymore, but that building is still paying almost $800,000 a year in property taxes because the building is still there. Kmart's gone, they don't use that building anymore, it doesn't matter. That building got built and it's still generating a significant amount of return to the community.
Who's in there? Polaris now and another?
Polaris is in there. There's a major regional distribution company, and then United Parcel Service is going to be relocating their south of the river distribution center there. So very high paying wage jobs, and reusing that building. That's the beauty in Shakopee, I think, that a lot of these big buildings that have been built over time just keep getting reused and keep getting put on the tax rolls and keep generating revenue for the community. So number 2 is TIF is elderly housing on the Bluff, decertified in 1997, $5 million market value today, $57,000 in annual taxes, of which the city gets $14,000.
Is that you mean Levy Drive, or?
Yeah, Levy Drive, sorry. TIF number 3 was a TIF district, so that was the downtown area. Created in 1982, was decertified in 2000. That paid for the downtown streets and sidewalks. So that was the revenue generated just from those properties in the downtown. TIF number 4 was the original Canterbury, 1984, decertified in 1994. The racetrack today has an $11 million market value, generates $406,790 in total annual taxes, of which $52,769 come back to the city. This one we have many, I'm sure someone knows here. TIF number 6 was the Shakopee Valley Motel in 1985, decertified in 1987. We don't really have any records on this particular TIF, so it wasn't very large, I can tell you that.
Remember,
TIF numbers.
We missed TIF number 5.
So what's happened over the years is some of them have vanished. So TIF number 5 was formed and not used because whatever the purpose was got taken up by TIF number 1. So TIF number 1 funded the acquisitions of blocks 3 and 4. That's why TIF number 5 was created. But there was enough revenue left in that district that council never moved it forward and used it for the revenue from TIF number 1. And you'll see there's a couple other that are missing because projects did not move forward. TIF number 7 was MEBCO, 1998, decertified in 1994. Today, it's got a market value of just over $3 million, $57,000 in annual taxes, $14,000 to the city, and that building's been reused. I believe it's
Counselor Lehman?
How can it decertify 4 years before it was actually
I'm sorry,
authorized?
2004. That was a typo.
2004?
That one really worked out for us.
TIF number 9, it was an interesting story. It was FMG Sumura, 2000, decertified 2009. The property was redeveloped actually under TIF number 12. So that was a Japanese company that located here. They were doing perfume and other things. They ended up getting purchased. That business went away. But they had built a really large building that was just sitting there. And you'll see it was redeveloped in a later TIF.
Potpourri.
Soft soap.
It's coming. TIF number 10 was River City Center, 1999. It will be decertified in 2024. Redevelopment TIF was senior housing. That was a TIF that the city actually bonded for, so there are actually GO bonds off the TIF revenue for that project. It has a $9.6 million market value today. It pays $128,000 in total annual taxes, and 56,000 of that goes back into the TIF. TIF number 11 was Seagate, 2000 decertified in 2009. So that was a city EDA deal for 3.6 million. Was used to purchase land, fill the site, grade, and also created a large parking lot. So there's still a piece of that site that's owned by the city of Shakopee. It was purchased from MnDOT by the city. So 800 jobs. Today, the market value is $22 million. They pay $815,000 in annual taxes, of which $105,000 comes back to the city. TIF number 12 was Challenge Printing, 2005, decertified in 2014. So that was the Japanese company. They had built that building. Challenge Printing, which is now Imagine Print Solutions, purchased that building. They added on to the building and renovated. It's a huge structure. You can see it is from the market value today of $21 million. They pay $800,000 plus in annual taxes, of which $103,000 of that comes back to the city of Shakopee.
I think that building stood vacant for a while, didn't it?
A little bit, but it's been reused. It's, you know, it's funny about the reuse and then the opportunity for taxes and value and jobs and the longevity of that. It's like the Kmart building and all these buildings the buildings never go away. The community's got them and they're being repurposed with new businesses.
I'm putting which ones I voted for. I voted for that one, voted for that one, didn't vote for that one, voted for that one. Voted
Yes, no, yes, no.
Yeah.
Picking winners and losers.
Yeah.
TIF
right.
number
Job.
13
All
was
about
probably
job.
our smallest TIF, but as Darren pointed out to me, look what year it was, 2007, so right at the recession. Decertified in 2015, $188,000 TIF and a corporate headquarters, $3 million market value today, $114,000 in taxes, of which $14,000 come to the city. This is actually a company that's growing. They have their building on the market and are looking for a bigger building because they're at about 200 employees now and they can't fit in that building. So it's a good success story.
Counselor Luce?
200 well-paid employees.
Yes, I was going to add in, their average wage is well above $25 an hour.
Slightly.
TIF number 14 is J&J Sanmar, 2014 decertifies in 2022. It's a pay-go note. The building's valued at $23 million, $852,748 in taxes a year. $16,000 goes to the city and roughly $15,000 to the county. So that land was worth a decent amount. As Councilmember Lehman pointed out, we still get the value of the land, so that's money coming back to the city. And that has $330,386 of TIF that come in every year to pay down their pay-go note. TIF number 15 is Trident All States, to be decertified in 2039. That's a pay-go note for $1 million towards 20% affordable units. Has an $11 million market value, $4,000 in original net tax capacity. Currently, they pay $202,000 a year in taxes. $155,000 goes back to that TIF. So that based on their numbers and Darren running our numbers, that should probably pay off in 2024. They've actually paid down their note with the bank and are now paying themselves back that $1 million at, I believe it was 5 or 6% interest.
But this is an opportunity where we used it for housing with the 20% affordable. Some of the other ones were some of the infrastructure and
Yes, sir.
economic development ones, but this one was for affordable housing. One of those different options you pointed out at the beginning of the
Yep, and Mayor and Council provide us annually with a rent roll showing the 20% of those units that are affordable and what the rents are. And so they use working with Scott County, they're using some vouchers and other things to write those rents down even further to provide very low-income housing for seniors that have potentially disabilities or other issues.
Thank you.
This is great history and great information.
Mayor was learning, going through the old binders with
Councilor
dust.
Lewis?
What do they call affordable for those 20%? What is the?
It's mayor and council, so elderly is either 1 or 2 people in the state of Minnesota, and it's 30% of their income, and at their ages, it's 30% of their Social Security. So they're paying $600, $700 a month there, which is very low. I think these facilities is probably in the $2,000 to $3,000 range is what market rate is. So they're very heavily subsidized by
Yeah, and it's
this
a very
TIF.
nice facility. I visited it, and
So RAR expansion was TIF number 16, 2016 to be decertified in 2025. It's a pay-go for $1.88 million towards infrastructure and site work. Kept one of our oldest and important industries, expanded their employment, transformed kind of the west end of that portion of the city, and they were potential relocations. So this was a pretty good investment that's cleaned up. And this is one that, based on the 2025 and some other issues, so on these large corporate TIFs, they sometimes will go and against their valuation and get it lower because the amount they're paying and the amount they could lose in the TIF is small compared to the amount they're paying in fiscal disparities and state taxes. So they're probably fine not recovering their 1.88 million because they're saving it by going to the county and going against their valuation because the amount they're paying in those fiscal disparities and state taxes is pretty substantial.
But Michael, in some of these other cases, there was no business to start with, and so the base was very low. Here in RAR was already a significant base.
Correct.
That still, all of it gets paid, but the base flows into the general fund.
So as Councilmember Lehman mentioned earlier, so this is one of the ones where the base was really high to begin with. They put in those new buildings, which raised their base even higher. They went to the county, got their value reduced, which of course impacts their TIF, but the value they got it reduced saves them on the fiscal disparities and the state tax side.
Okay.
You'll see in a second, I mean, the numbers that get paid out on these larger projects and fiscal disparities and on this, in 2001, the state tax you see on the bills is really the school tax. It actually says that in the legislation.
That's our money we give to Prior Lake.
The fiscal disparities money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this
Which-
was,
That we don't even get a Christmas card for, by the way.
they'll give us a card for that. This is one of the projects that, it was not used as a redevelopment tool, but totally redeveloped our west end.
This is an economic development TIF, so it's 9
Right.
years.
So, but it redeveloped part of our community. So this is, to me, that you look at what they did on the west end of Shakopee, and
Grew their
you can
business
see the value.
substantially.
Yeah, it kept them here.
And Michael, in this one, there's actually no interest rate on that RAR one either.
Yeah, the RAR one's at 0% interest. It's a pay-go pocket. They didn't go to a bank. They're just funding it out of themselves.
okay.
So. This is TIF number 17, 4th Avenue in Shenandoah, also known as Amazon. So today, $60 million in market value. They pay $2.22 million annual taxes. $35,000 comes to the city, and about $35,000 goes to the county. Interfund loans on this one, they pay $886,612 into the TIF. So no monies go to Amazon. In fact, Amazon does not even own that building. It is owned by USAA Insurance Real Estate Fund. So USAA
How much
built
money
that.
goes to USAA?
USAA built that building, and Amazon is purely a tenant. They do not own that building. So none of the monies from this TIF go to Amazon. So
And they don't go to USA either.
they don't go to USAA either. So they go to pay for the city for the reconstruction of 12th Avenue, $2.3 million and some change, so 40.7%. And they pay the county for County Highway 83 in concrete for $3.379 million.
Did they pay any assessments on them improvements?
Are they paying?
Did they pay any assessments for the frontage on them, on the Shenandoah or Fourth?
No, but no other businesses.
No other
paid for
business did either.
assessments along that way either, though.
So only residents pay for assessments on roads in front of their property.
Something we should look at in the future.
If we didn't TIF this, it
Every
would have been
resident would have paid
assessed.
for it.
And then the rest that wasn't assessed would have been paid by the general taxpayer.
And how much would that assessment have been on that property? It doesn't
Well, it would have
matter.
been 30% or whatever our assessment rate is of the
Yeah.
2.3 million.
Right.
And the 70% of that would have been picked up by the rest of the taxpayers.
So.
Which would have been a tax increase across the board
Tax
for everybody.
increase.
But instead, we've used the increment to fund that.
Capture the
You
increment
captured their taxes to pay for the road improvement, but
for the benefit
then
of
you
the
don't,
community.
then you don't have like TIF number 1, you don't have the taxes coming off the property to pay for all these other community-wide enhancements.
No, but the mayor and council, the difference here today is that, so this district basically includes 12th Avenue and Highway County 83. And so Amazon gets nothing. They're paying 2.2 million, of which $565,000 goes to the school district
I
through
think
the
that's
state.
Fourth Avenue, it should read
Fourth
Fourth Avenue.
Fourth
yeah.
Avenue, I'm sorry.
And look
Fourth
at
Avenue.
the organic growth with the Duke Realty buildings now that's filled with a great business, as well as Mr. Pillow.
So what,
CommScope came back.
the benefit of doing the one building ones for the community today are that you get that large amount of money goes to pay for public roads. So sure, Amazon's using, Fourth Avenue, and they're using Shenandoah, and they're using County Highway 83, but so is everybody else. County Highway 83, everyone going to 169 is using that, and it's being paid for by Amazon.
I think it just opened.
And
We
the
should put
difference
a
is,
toll
all-
on that road.
It just
Pardon?
opened.
just open.
We should put a toll on
Counselor
that
Mokel?
road.
I'd actually like to go back to the assessment piece. So you're saying that none of these businesses were assessed for, but our policy assesses businesses when we do
Oh,
road
absolutely.
improvements.
So the
Yeah,
policy is
it-
30%, so Certainty, all the businesses down that road would have paid 30% of the
Right, and
cost,
so I
and the
just didn't want
taxpayers
to
would.
mislead the taxpayers that all of a sudden businesses aren't paying assessments and
Correct.
only the taxpayers are. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and all of those business, because this was TIP, did not pay assessments for this. So they did not pay the 30% because we captured it for the TIP.
But by doing this, we didn't increase the taxes on the residents because we had to do road improvements either.
So no resident in the community paid for those roads, they're all being paid for by the new
Right.
revenue generated by
But
the
had we
Amazon
not
business.
done the TIF,
Everyone would
that
have
would
paid.
have been assessed, yes.
And I
thank
think
you.
the other point, so when you had the districts that everyone benefited from, the benefit here is that My Pillow and SAIA's new building pays 100% of their revenue to the city.
Council, Luce?
With that new road in front of all those buildings, does that up their property value in any way? Because then they would be paying extra taxes for
Mayor and
that
council,
road.
it's a good point. So what typically happens with the new model in Minnesota, and particularly here, is if things get improved in the area, everybody's value go up. So
Yeah.
that's what's probably gonna happen in downtown over time, is if we were to do these smaller TIF projects, rising waters float all the boats, so everyone's taxes will go up, and the city will benefit, because all of that increment
Yeah.
comes back.
So in a roundabout way, we're getting some benefit out of those companies.
And I think the final point on this, Mayor and Council, is that both the Fourth Avenue and Shenandoah projects and County Highway 83, these were going to happen regardless of whether or not this building was there. And because of this building going in, we were able to essentially not pass the cost of all of those road improvements on to the general taxpayer.
Continue.
So the current Canterbury TIF number 18, one of the largest underutilized sites in the city, major buried access because of public roads ended into the property, 33 million public infrastructure. As Mr. Reynolds pointed out, on this one, 12th Avenue, Canterbury, no Canterbury, needs to get rebuilt. So that is one where we're gonna do TIF bonds, so we get the first call on the revenue out that will pay for those bonds that go to pay for 12th Avenue. So it's a combination of pay-go, so Canterbury's paying for Barronshire, their internal roads, city streets, and Shenandoah. The city is paying out of the TIF revenue for the 12th Avenue reconstruction and the roundabout. Also, major utility upgrades in this area and some major storm drainage. And the long-term benefit is there'll be $350 million plus in new investment in Canterbury that's basically vacant land today. So that's all pretty highly assessed, so all of that stays on the books, as Councilmember Lehman mentioned earlier. So all that value that Canterbury pays today doesn't go away, they're still paying that. So this is not helping the track per se, or the gambling function that happens there. This is the land outside of that. That's still paying their full 100% tax rate. There's no benefit to them whatsoever as far as the TIF goes.
Well, 12th Avenue redeveloped and rebuilt would make it easier to enter their establishment, along with Shenandoah, their gambling establishment.
Mayor and Council, to be honest, Barronshire will make it actually work. It's,
Right.
even if we improve 12th Avenue, we do Shenandoah, that helps the local traffic. I think that if you read the SRF traffic report, the thing that really helps Canterbury is Barronshire.
Barronshire, right.
That becomes kind of a one way, either way we need when they have big events to get traffic flowing. I think the issue right now on County Highway 83 is that there's no easy way to get into Canterbury. Barronshire will make that happen.
Counselor Luce?
With that total investment by the companies that Canterbury sells to, what are we projecting to come in tax revenues that will originally pay the TIF off, but then after that will go to the taxing entities?
Look to our chief financial officer.
Look at it.
That was speculative, I guess.
It's a big
Right,
number.
absolutely. So if you look at the Amazon building, that's at $60 million, and that's generating $2.2 million in taxes. Now we get, off of that building, we probably get 12% after state taxes, and, because it all depends on the type of property as well, too. So residential, the
Right.
city would get more
Lot
than
more
that
of it
because
on
there's
the
no fiscal
apartments.
disparities or state general
Right.
tax.
But if you take the 60 million you were just talking about and they're paying 2 point something, this is 350 million, which is 5 to 6 times higher than that. I'm talking total taxes, not just the
It's-
city.
I don't have enough fingers and toes.
It's about 12 million plus.
Right,
But
right.
the residential is a much bigger number because they don't pay fiscal disparities or that state tax. So more of that money comes back to the city and the county and the school district. So it's actually the residential piece there that really runs the TIF. It's nice that we're gonna get all the other investment, but that residential really makes the roads work.
But I look at it, I'm sorry, Counselor Lewis.
Well, and just one side benefit to the housing project is the projected number of students that will reside in that building is severely low. I mean, I think they projected 40 students maybe. So on a building that size, the school's gonna benefit really greatly.
And as Mr. Reynolds mentioned earlier, so if the district does another levy for whatever, this project, all these TIFs pay those levies. And Minnesota's a little unusual, so the state now collects fiscal disparities and the state tax. That state tax is basically the corporate school tax. That gets pulled back and reimbursed back to the school districts based on a per student basis. So that's where that money's coming from. So if they had 40 new students, the state will reimburse the school district for 40 new students. It's actually the capital facilities that exist today, that's where that school tax goes, they're not paying, but the levies they actually will pay for.
And which is one of, if I may, going back to the study I'd cited earlier, which is one of the issues that study had with other states, that they didn't, unlike Minnesota, did not capture that particular funding stream, and it actually has a disparate impact on the school districts. That does not occur in Minnesota because of the 2001 tax law changes.
But the Canterbury, just on the back, I think that much even like Amazon, the jobs, the apartment buildings, the shops, the restaurants that will come with Canterbury, as well as the surrounding organic growth that will occur. I think you'll see that on parcel off of 83 in Eagle Creek, all around there that you'll see. We actually see a spec building going up off of, well, I think they front on 4th Avenue, but their back end is on Barnshire there, on the other part of Canterbury. But that's where you're gonna make it, that you'll see. And pretty soon the gravel pit will come online and get redeveloped as well.
And Mayor and Council, I mean, we're already getting phone calls from parcels outside of the district. So, you know, as part of this project, the 12th Avenue mess, we call it, where Culver's is gonna get hopefully fixed through Mr. Lilhog's efforts. There are people now looking today that are calling us about purchasing that property because they see with the new concrete road going in on the county side that we're paying part of as out of our general tax obligation, and the improvements to that intersection, which right now is pretty dangerous. Long term, that's going to be a valuable property. The fact that UPS, of all the sites it could choose, has chosen to go there, tells you that they're seeing good economic value in the area. So this is the River Bluff TIF number 19. It's a pay-go, cleaning up a garbage dump, reimbursing the city for the property acquisition, undergrounding the utilities along the River Bluff, expanding Spuck's water line capacity, improving 3 roads, and paying for the streetscape. This is Old City Hall TIF number 20, so removing the old foundation walls and asbestos lining, removing the bedrock building walls to hold up the sidewalks, the streets, and the railway, reimbursing the city for property demolition, paying for 70% of the new concrete alley, upgrading the utilities, particularly in that alley, and doing the streetscaping on Holmes and Second. And this is currently our last one, the Southbridge Soils TIF. Again, they're kind of the unicorn of TIFs. It's number 21. It's paying for the removal of a garbage dump, and it's also a pay-go. And you should see actually the contract for private development at the October EDA meeting for this particular TIF. So the bottom line, TIF has created new jobs. I think now that you've seen all of these, we need to use the ED TIF for higher wage jobs. I think that we've gotten a lot of tax capacity out of some of these big projects, but not a lot of long-term high-paying jobs, which I think Open Systems is a really good example. It wasn't very much of a TIF. I wish we could find them a building that they could move into. That would be one that would be worth doing an economic development TIF for, because they're very high-wage jobs and they're a very big growing company. TIF puts costs on the developer, who's reimbursed for expenses only of successful economic growth, and they're only reimbursed up to the maximum amount in the TIF plan. So they don't get the benefit of the number of years, they only get the benefit of the original present value number. Impact TIF on taxes, there's no direct impact to the individual taxpayer. It uses that new tax increment, which would not exist without the development. Taxing jurisdictions still get their tax prior to the TIF. Taxes do not go up due to a TIF. TIF districts still pay other new tax levies, and commercial TIFs still pay the fiscal disparities in the state tax. Again, Amazon's paying about $1.2 million a year in fiscal disparities and the state tax. Plus, they're still paying the city $35,000 and the county $35,000. Impact of the school district, we've talked about large fixed costs and primarily funded through state funding formula based on the number of pupils. That's the state tax on all the commercial property. They still pay new levies. They still contribute to that state tax. The increase in school population, as Councilmember Luce mentioned, these projects really are not going to have a lot of children.
And if I may, it's important to recognize it still contribute to state taxes, and as Michael said, that's part of the 2001 tax law changes, and those state taxes are the taxes that fund the per pupil reimbursement that the state gives, and which makes Minnesota different than a lot of other states.
And I'll mention a lot of other TIF states, one of the rubs is against the school district. In other states, they get 100% of the school levy. So the state school, if you build an apartment building and add 100 people and 30 children, you get 0, because in those states, the school taxes are funded out of the property tax. We are not one of those states. It's funded, as Mr. Reynolds said, in 2001, they changed the taxing structure. Those districts have a huge impact on schools, and you'll see a lot of those states have changed it now, where if the school's majority funding comes out of TIF, they have to sign off on it, and there's all stuff on the internet, you can read about that. But we are not one of those states. The change where the state tax was created on commercial property was a way to kind of solidify the long-term funding strategy for the school districts. So not all projects should use TIF. New residential development on clean undeveloped land is not eligible, also known as residential subdivisions. We would recommend that new ED TIFs should deliver higher wage jobs. The city today carefully weighs TIF and any other incentive development tools we have with our financial consultants. A very small part of the city growth is attached to TIF, and TIF districts have accelerated because of growth in value. I think we showed you that in the chart.
In conclusion, I think it's very important to understand that TIF is not an end-all and be-all for everything. It's not an economic development panacea that we can draw upon. It's for those very limited, and especially under Minnesota law, those very limited things that we've already previously discussed. If you look at it, and you look at TIFs, you know, you have a wide disparity among the states in regards to what can be done at TIF. Minnesota has really done very well, although they could be a little more open, like Wisconsin, which frankly this study also said had one of the best openness and transparency initiatives in regards to TIFs. But that being said, so Minnesota has narrowed that, and frankly the city of Shakopee, we have narrowed TIF for what we do even more. And there are a lot of times where an initial discussion will be TIF. Well, frankly, when we were talking about Canterbury initially, there were, we want a TIF moving barns. We want a TIF for this, and that simply, we were very firm. No, we use TIFs for infrastructure, public infrastructure, and that's it. And that's exactly what you're getting out of that Canterbury TIF after many, many months of negotiations. So.
And I think to Mayor and Council, Mr. Reynolds' point, I mean, they wanted to use TIF to move the barns, to write the land cost down, and we said, you'll get some value back because the new roads will go in, and those new corporate headquarters you're trying to get by writing down the land, they aren't gonna have to pay for the roads and utilities that they normally would because we're doing it through a TIF. So their value basically will help underwrite their own project.
And to be clear, everything they were asking for was legal under Minnesota law, but not something that the city was willing to do.
Comment?
Yes, thank you for your presentation tonight, appreciate it. Will this be available on the website?
So Mayor and Council, we're gonna post this on the website, and Jen Brewington and Jonathan and our PIO are actually working on a new webpage for TIFs that will actually have links. It's similar to Edina's, but we'll do it better. That will have links to all of the actual TIF plans so that people can go and click and see what revenue is pledged, how much it's costing, when they get decertified. But we will post this tomorrow.
Maybe you can put a link to this presentation tonight too?
Yep,
for
on the front
follow-up
page.
on that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilor Luce?
Well, as Mr. Reynolds was saying with the negotiations with Canterbury, the but-for test came in very, very well because, they wanted the world, and that but-for kicked in and they got the infrastructure, and that's it,
Michael and staff, thank you for this. I've seen the state information. I've known about many of these TIF districts. I think the educational piece, the learning piece tonight, long-term planning, I think was excellent. Same with that article that Mr. Reynolds was talking about. I think if used prudently, it can certainly benefit your community in the long term. Councilor Moko?
I do appreciate the presentation as well, and I think that we do a really good job here in Minnesota. But I did want to ask what some of the pitfalls of TIF could be if not used correctly. Because in my research, part of it was gentrification of areas and can be a problem, but how do we combat that here in Shakopee because of our policies?
Mayor, did you say, we're having problems with the sound tonight, so did you say gentrification?
Yes.
Yeah. So Mayor and Council, I don't think we've seen much of that in Shakopee. I think the only thing we've seen is, Councilmember Millian pointed out tonight, the less expensive homes are going up in value because we're a low-tax city, people want to live here, there's good entry-level homes. I don't think a TIF's necessarily going to impact that. I will say that in other communities, they've used, not here, but they've used that TIF district in the larger, broader area to buy up a lot of those homes and basically gentrify those neighborhoods. I think that's something we just need to be careful about. I think that some of the pitfalls I've seen is that in communities that allow kind of that couple square mile TIF districts, it does hurt the other taxing districts, be it either the county or the school district, because they don't have what Minnesota has. I think that one of the couple of cities we've looked at surrounding us have what I call TIF happiness, so that's their first solution for everything. I mean, I think council's been good that you've used some tax abatements, we've partnered with the state on some projects. I think Minnesota's in generally been pretty good that we don't compete against each other anymore, I think, on projects. We all may submit a proposal, but we don't get down where a company goes to one community and then another community and another community, because between greater MSP and the state, they try to control that from happening because it hurts everybody, because you're basically bidding against yourself all the time. I've seen other states where have bigger cities where they're actually competing with TIFs, and it's the race to the bottom as far as the numbers go, and so they're not covering those basic services, so they're putting in huge developments which are in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in a 1 square block area, and it's going to generate some demand there, and they have no way to pay for that. I think that we have the benefit, as you saw in the budget tonight, we're a pretty healthy community financially. I think California ran in, they used they got so constricted on their property tax, they used TIF for everything, and they spun off their parks and rec districts into separate taxing districts. Well, at the end of the day, someone still had to pay all those bills, and it reached a point where, even though they had froze the property tax, other taxes got piled on, and it basically had the point where it was bankrupting people out of their houses. I think the benefit here is that you all have been pretty judicious, and I think Minnesota's got a pretty tight control on the TIFs.
Thank you.
Councilor Luce?
Well, Councilor Mokel said something about the downside of TIFs. If you read the article on the Chicago TIFs and the abuse of it, that's a real eye-opener. I mean, they really abused the heck out of it. That was the first article somebody referred me to, and it scared me so bad on TIFs, it was unbelievable.
Well, we're not Chicago, we're not California, we're a conservative
Little Chicago.
community here. Very conservative. I think we've used it very prudently. I think there's tremendous benefits in the areas that we've used it, and over 45 years, 20 districts, none of them have failed.
And Mayor and Council, I think we also good benefit we've had over the years, good legal counsel, and Kennedy and Graven and others. Springstead, I think, is probably one of the better. Our TIF council is also Bloomington. It's not like this is their first rodeo. They've seen what other communities have done, and they're pretty honest with us to say, yeah, that's probably not going to work, because I've seen it not work in 5 other places, so don't even suggest it. So I think that's good that we have some bench history here that's really good for the community.
Councilor Lehman?
Does anybody know what happened, what went wrong with Excelsior Henderson?
It was a motorcycle company in Belle Plaine, and
What happened?
I think the city took on the risk, and it failed as an entity, and then they were left holding. There's been some issues in Chanhassen in the past. That's the one in Belle Plaine was a good example.
Well, a good example might be, and we can use this one. So you all issued non-geo back revenue bonds for the asphalt shingle plant.
Yeah.
You could have done TIF or something else there, and it could have had a pretty big downside to the city, but you took the safest path to try and get a project to move forward. It didn't move forward. Somebody came and paid off the bonds, and that property is going to end up getting redeveloped into another use because that concept just didn't work. I think that you have to kind of weigh your risks in every project, and some projects, maybe the risk up front's high, but long term it's going to be a good company. I've been involved with some startups where you can kind of see the people that have put the money into the company have a way bigger risk than the community. So if someone's invested $100 million and you're going to invest $250,000, you have to really weigh that risk. And I think you all have been really good at kind of weighing the risk reward. And you can see from the TIFs, they've returned a pretty high value back to the community.
Mr. Mayor, quick, 30,000-foot level at Excelsior, what happened, you had a company that went under. It wasn't pay-as-you-go. It was bond issued,
By
city
the
takes on
city.
the risk.
Right.
General obligation bonds?
I don't remember if it was revenue or general
Right.
obligation. But
Then you lose the revenue.
But you lose the revenue, business goes under, there's nobody there to pay the taxes,
Game over.
game over.
Yeah, and that left a scar on that community for a long time. And so, but I think here in Shakopee, we're even more conservative from that aspect, so. Excellent discussion. Thank you. Let's move forward then to 8B1, the annexation of 12675 Marystown Road. Michael, welcome back.
It's Marystown Road folks have been here for a while.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out.
So Mayor and Council, this is kind of exciting. This is 12675 Marystown Road. So this is the parcel outlined in red, right adjacent to the city. This is Windermere across the street. And so they've requested annexation into the city because they want to grow and expand. So great local business, Shakopee Vet. So this is their concept site plan. This will be the new building. They'll be eventually either remodeling or demolishing their existing building. Currently, they're on a well and septic system. This is going to be their new building, so pretty exciting, big investment. So criteria for approving an owner petition annexation, share 50 linear feet with the city of Shakopee's municipal boundary, which they meet. The Planning Commission recommended 4-0 approval of the annexation. Staff recommends resolution number R 2018-108, the annexation of property at 12675 Marystown Road.
Okay, questions of staff?
Can you put
Counselor
that
Lehman?
map back
Oh,
up?
I'm sorry. Counselor Luce,
No, it's fine, go ahead. I just wanted to look at the map for a
the
minute.
map, Counselor Luce, or Lehman?
I'm not opposed to the business staying there, expanding and everything. The question I have is, you want to extend MUSA, which is Metropolitan Urban Service Areas, when the Metropolitan services aren't available.
So, Mayor and Council, you'll see as we move through this presentation, because there's 2 more items, they are across the street, and they have worked with SPUC and the city engineer to make sure that they're available. So they've reached agreement with, conceptual agreement with the adjoining 2 churches and D.R. Horton to get utilities.
Other questions? Counselor Mokel?
I was just gonna have the question about, we have, not really planned for this area, but like we did across the street. Do we have any concerns that we're going to piecemeal this together at some point?
So, Mayor and Council, the 2040 plan, this was guided for single family and this little bit of commercial. This was guided for residential because I don't think, we didn't guide it because wasn't in the city. We did not have an orderly annexation agreement with the township. Now that we do, the plan is to, if I get this to work, to leave this front piece commercial and leave the back residential. It will be landlocked, but at some point, and I can't zoom in on this, but these streets are all stubbed out, and in the new subdivision that you all approved here that was annexed in, they've stubbed out the streets, so long-term, all of these streets will come through. And in working with the county, at some point, they're gonna probably lose their access on Marystown, and they'll come back through this neighborhood to a arterial.
Okay,
Or
because that was
collector.
gonna be my second question.
Yep.
Like, okay.
So all of that has been worked through, and I think it's a pretty good solution for everybody.
Counselor Lehman?
So they won't be able to put anything on the back half until the property to the north is platted?
So this all just annexed in and is under construction,
Yep.
and they've stubbed out the roads. Whenever
Right.
this property owner, there's one property owner that kind of wraps around whenever they decide to sell or subdivide, those roads will be brought through and that piece will get developed.
The question is, right where your pointer was,
Hold on, let's see if we can get, come back, there we go.
right
Here.
there, before you can put a house in that area, it's gonna have to have access.
Right.
Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
today.
So,
So we're guiding it and zoning it, but everyone understands you can't access it. And you can't
until
develop
it comes down from the north.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that same is true as the water, all of that'll get pulled, so it'll be looped, so it'll be across here, and then all of the water and sewer up here will get pulled down, so this will then be kind of the connection for looping.
So are they gonna have new services in a new building?
Yes, if you, oops, hang on. Here's the new building.
Right? Are they gonna have new city sewer?
So they will
water?
they have an existing well that they can use, and they have an existing septic system they can use, so based on our orderly annexation agreement, if you remember, Mayor and Council, as long as they have, and they're working and they haven't failed, they can
Yeah.
continue to use
Yeah.
them. So Plan A is they'll continue to use them. When that water line gets brought across the street, which I think will be in short order, because they've been working on it, they'll hook up to city water. When sewer comes and connects, they'll connect to the sewer.
And then they'll pay the hookup fees at
Yep.
that time?
Yeah.
Okay? That's what we talked about at the
Yeah,
annexation.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Exactly.
Yep.
when this got negotiated, this is like the perfect example of how it works.
Exactly, I agree. Other questions of staff? Other questions of staff? If not, counselors? Counselor
Take
Whiting?
I'd like to move and adopt resolution R 2018-108, a resolution annexing property located at 12675 Marystown Road into the city of Shakopee.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Luce. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Now, moving ahead. 8B2, comprehensive plan amendment for the same subject site of 12675 Marystown Road. Counselor Luce, or Counselor Lehman?
I'll offer resolution R 218-109, approving the comp plan amendment for 12675 Marystown Road, guiding it for commercial and single family.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Mokel. Discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Moving ahead to actually now the rezoning. 8B3 rezoning 12675 Marystown Road. Counselor Mokel.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 02018-015, approving the rezoning of 12675 Marystown Road.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Luce. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Welcome to Shakopee.
They've been great to work with, great Shakopee business.
Thank you. All right, moving ahead then to 8B4, Envision Shakopee.
Mr. Mayor, while Eric is pulling up his information, I just wanted to let everybody know that this will be the last presentation he'll be making for you. Eric is joining the private sector. We'll be heading to SRF. As you know, he was the 2018 Minnesota Planner of the Year. I certainly hate to see him go, but fully understand his thought processes and what he's looking to achieve in the future. And sir, best of luck. Thank you for all of your hard work. You've been a tremendous member of this staff, and you'll be missed.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cashed in, huh?
And I'm only Minnesota Planner of the Year for the next week, so I got to bask in that while
We
I
will
still
miss
can.
you.
So thank you. Tonight we're here for an important milestone for Envision Shakopee, seeking authorization for staff to send out the comp plan, the draft comp plan for adjacent jurisdiction review. That's a required step in the comprehensive planning process, where we do send that out to our adjacent and affected jurisdictions, so all cities, townships, counties, school districts, watershed districts, state agencies. There's a long list where we provide them an opportunity to provide feedback on our plan. They also provide that opportunity to us. We are reviewing those plans as they come in, and they'll offer that same to us. Just as an overview for those watching at home or in the room tonight, the comprehensive plan is our city's long-range visioning document. We're required to update our plan every 10 years. We're in that cycle right now. The comp plan is meant to be community-oriented and future-thinking. It's a 20-year plan. We're planning for the year 2040. It's meant to be aspirational and visionary. It lays out a menu of options for the city, for what the city can do in the future to address a number of community issues, and also can be used as a communications and marketing tool. So Envision Shakopee represents a major shift in planning from our current 2030 plan. Really everything from the planning process that we've undertaken is different to the actual document itself. I hope you've noticed a change in the look and feel of the document compared to our 2030 plan. And then it also addresses new issues and trends that we're facing today. It's a process that we began in the summer of last year. We really took a lot of time to really hear from the community. That was really important, where we came with no preconceived notions, and we really wanted to talk to the community about what was important to them. We didn't really begin actually writing the plan until the winter of 2018. That is because we wanted to spend so much time hearing from the community. We did release the first draft in June at an open house and at a meeting with this body. So far, the plan has received overwhelming positive comments from the public. Since we released the draft in June, we've heard from over 400 people, whether that's online, at an open house, or at Rhythm on the Rails, and the response remains overwhelmingly positive. Over the course of the last couple months, we've been doing some small updates, revisions, edits to the plan, and we released a second draft in late August. Just a couple weeks ago, the Planning Commission held a public hearing for the comp plan. We will be doing 2 public hearings as part of the process for increased transparency. One person attended that public hearing and spoke in favor of the plan, and the Planning Commission recommended to the City Council on a 7-0 vote that the Council authorized staff to release the draft plan to adjacent jurisdictions. We'll go into that 6-month process where we'll get feedback from other jurisdictions, and we will also continue to do some refinement to the plan as well.
Plans?
I'm sorry?
Are we going to receive their plans as well?
We've been receiving plans for a couple of months, and we're really expecting to get a number of new plans coming just as the process continues for a number of cities. We're going to focus on really updating the Envision Shakopee website to really put this plan on the website so it's digestible, so people don't have to go into a large document. And then we'll continue to make some refinements, including the comp plan amendment and annexation that you all just approved. Things are just happening so quickly that we'll have to make some updates as we move forward. As I mentioned earlier, community engagement has been really important to this plan. We've heard from over 3,000 people as part of the process. And that community feedback led us to 10 community priorities, which are listed here, which led to a number of big ideas. And instead of talking about that, I'm just going to show you. You probably have seen the video that we pulled together. But probably a little bit more fun than me going through the whole plan. Hi, I'm Eric Weiss, the city's long-range planner. I'm here today to talk to you about Envision Shakopee, the city's comprehensive plan. Wait, don't fall asleep on me. I got good stuff. Founded in 1857, Shakopee is an important regional hub for business, entertainment, family life, and fun. It's also been an important place to the Dakota tribe for thousands of years. Cheers. As a community, we're proud of our history and the community we've built. Now, as we look to the future, we're excited to put forth a vision for where Shakopee could go next. And that's where Envision Shakopee comes in. Envision Shakopee is our new comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is the city's vision and blueprint for the next 20 years, laying out potential action steps the city and its partners can take to improve the livability and vitality of the city. Over the last year, at events, in small groups, and online at envisionshakopee.com, we've heard from over 3,000 people about their vision for the future of Shakopee. And we've heard consistent themes from all ages, races, and corners of the community. Those themes were used to produce 12 big ideas. The big ideas serve as the foundation of the plan and represent goals we can set with the community. We've all done some great work over the past few years to spruce up downtown. With millions of visitors each year, it's important we make all the gateways to the city welcoming and attractive. This will encourage repeat visitors and new businesses, as well as institute a sense of community pride. Shakopee is a river town, but we haven't fully embraced the Minnesota River. Improvements like Huber Park are a great start, but imagine a river walk, easy access for kayakers, and what Shakopee could be if we truly embrace this asset. We've heard from some businesses that employee attraction and retention can be difficult, partly due to the lack of nearby restaurants and things to do. After all, no one wants to sit in their cube all day. We have an opportunity to modernize our employment centers by adding amenities, connecting like-minded businesses, and focusing on high-quality design. One of the things that makes Shakopee great is its variety of housing options. Unfortunately, rising housing costs means it's becoming increasingly difficult for many people to find an affordable place to call their own. Through partnerships and reduced regulation, we can set the stage for housing that's more affordable to the average person. First Avenue is a major commercial corridor and gateway into downtown. As we continue to invest, just think, First Avenue could be a great place for new jobs, restaurants, shops, and housing for seniors and young people alike, with close access to downtown and the river. Shakopee is a great community with many assets. Envision Shakopee lays out opportunities to bring things to the next level, including action items such as filling gaps in the trail network, making it safe for students to walk to school, and supporting neighborhood groups. Shakopee's park system is fantastic, offering a variety of trails, athletic options, and the community center. You've said there's room for improvement, however. Exploring options to add trees and benches along the trail system, add pollinator-friendly habitats, and more natural spaces to the park system is a critical component of the comprehensive plan. You've all said you want more opportunities to gather, celebrate, and meet with neighbors. The city has worked with businesses and the chamber to put on programs like this. Let's do more to celebrate. There's no doubt about it, our economy is changing. Online shopping, robotics, autonomous vehicles are just a few of the changes we face. Positioning the city to change with the economy rather than resist change will give Shakopee a leg up on its competition. Supporting existing and new businesses as well as workforce development is key to our shared success. With the changing economy, new businesses are bound to pop up. What if Shakopee could tap into the entrepreneurial spirit by encouraging and supporting co-working and co-making spaces? Or what better way to spark the local economy than bringing a community college or tech school to Shakopee? Critical to the livability and vitality of our community is our ability to get around easy and to transport goods. Shakopee needs a transportation system that works for everyone, from kids walking to school to semi-truck drivers serving local businesses. Finding an appropriate balance of transportation options is what you've asked for and what we're ready to deliver. Of course, we're the land of big fun. With millions of visitors coming to the Shakopee area every year, we have an opportunity to tap into and leverage our entertainment districts for job creation and to provide more opportunities for fun things to do. Together, these 12 big ideas for big success make up the core of Envision Shakopee. But the big ideas look expensive, right? Not necessarily. Much of this work can be accomplished through new policies, reduced regulation, and working smarter, not harder. Through smart investments and strategic planning, we can set the stage for private investment and development. Envision Shakopee was created through the input of thousands of people and represents the community's priorities. We're excited for the future of Shakopee. Will you join us in achieving this vision? For more information and to view the plan, visit envisionshakopee.com.
Great video.
All right, thank you. And thanks to our communication staff for helping to pull that together. It was a lot of fun. I'm excited that I was able to ride an antique car at Valley Fair during my time here. I feel like that was fitting. And that video has actually really helped spread the word about Envision Shakopee. We have had over 3,000 views on that video and has really, I think, generated some excitement and understanding of what the plan is all about. So as I mentioned, over the next 6 months, the work to continue to refine the plan will take place. We'll respond to comments from other jurisdictions. Following that 6-month period, we would then take that to the Planning Commission, where they would hold the second public hearing on the planning document, and then bring it forth to the City Council for final approval. We would then send that off to the Met Council for their review, and any comments that they would have would then put forth a process of negotiation and discussion between the Met Council and the city. We did provide them preliminary copy of our comprehensive plan, which they're currently reviewing. We expect to get comments back from them in the next month or so. That should help to expedite that process later in 2019. And then following Met Council approval, the City Council will then be asked to actually formally adopt and implement the plan. So with that, I am available for any questions.
Questions, comments? Councilor Lehman?
My third comp plan update, and I'm used to us as a council sitting down and going over the 6 required pieces. land use, transportation, stormwater, sewer capacity, parks and trails. When in this process does that happen?
We've had a number of conversations with the city council, and we're always available as staff to take feedback.
Well, I mean, us as a body, this body sitting down and saying, okay, here's our land use map, what do we all think? Because eventually, we're gonna be voting on approving this, and if there's no support for it, or a lack of support, then what? It seems to me we should be building consensus up front, instead of coming back at the 11th hour and going, okay, well, this is what it is, and if you don't like it, too bad.
Well, I think this process has been different. You know, the static plans of the comp plan of the past, you know, we got some grant money and hired a consultant we were 5 people. We went out in the community and asked what our community wanted for our community. And I think Eric did that in a great way. You were everywhere, every event out there in the public. When's the last time we had some 3,000 residents engage in some form or another to offer input to try to build our community? I think this is more of a public document than it's ever been.
You're not answering my question.
Well, when we first brought forth the plan, we brought that before council, and council approved that plan for what we were doing. It has been in front of council on several occasions, and it's always available if anybody has any concerns and wants to
Well, I
provide
certainly have
input.
lots of concerns about the land use aspect of it. And, you know, normally I take the land use aspect, and once that's figured out, that's what you base your population on, and that's what the number is to use for sewer capacity and transportation issues. So they all kind of feed off the actual land use, in my mind. And, you know, I can't imagine anybody supports the big idea of taking out Marshall Road and 17th Avenue. Some of these businesses are less than a year old. We're doing a 20-year plan that's saying, hey, you know, let's redevelop this whole area around it with apartment buildings because it's close to a bus station. To me, that's crazy. It would be easier to move the bus station to a different location. But that's what's in there. I had the luxury of reading the whole document just recently because of a bad eye situation that I had. And I wasn't able to go to the June meeting that I think this body had a workshop on it. You know, it's not something that I wanted it to happen, but, and here I am, we've got a plan that I have some grave concerns with, and didn't really have the opportunity to weigh in on it, so.
Well, you can still weigh in, it's still out for review.
Well, I just told you, I got some serious problems with the land use, and all the calculations are based off of that, so.
Other comments? Comments about the future of our community, 2040? I think, again, you did a real good job. I think I saw you out there. You held how many open houses, opportunities? This wasn't just, I think we're almost a year into this now, right? And you've asked for input from us as well along the way. So those old static components are still part of that bigger document. Councilor Whiting?
No, I think this has been a different process. This has been inviting the community to be part of the discussion. I do have a question. So if we release this to our, you know, different adjacent jurisdictions, if we modify it, if we have some concerns with some of the land use issues, would we have to reissue it to the adjacent jurisdictions if we make some tweaks to it?
No, there's expectations from the Met Council that there will be modifications. This is a process of hearing from other neighboring jurisdictions, and so the Met Council is expecting that not only will we continue to refine, but also we will be taking feedback if we receive that from any of our neighbors and incorporating that into our plan.
So tonight, all we're asking is to release this to the neighbors,
Correct.
and we can still take a look at it as a body.
And as I mentioned earlier, it's a requirement that other jurisdictions adjacent share theirs with ours for our review of theirs, right? So.
Correct.
Okay. All right, other comments? Discussion? Eric, thank you. We're gonna make a motion here? Counselor Whiting?
I'll make the motion to authorize staff to release the plan for adjacent jurisdiction review.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-2. Thank you. Moving ahead to 8B5, rescind denial of comprehensive plan amendment for the former City Hall site and adopt a resolution approving comprehensive plan amendment. I believe this will take 2 actions. We will start with a motion to rescind, and then we'll bring it back on the table for open discussion. Councilor Luce, do you want to make that motion?
I thought I already did by having it put on here, but make a motion to rescind. Go ahead. Yeah. Motion to rescind the City Council's August 21st, 2018 decision to deny the comprehensive plan amendment relating to the former City Hall site at 129 Home Street.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Whiting. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion to rescind passes 4-1. Now, the comp plan amendment for the former City Hall for institutional use to mixed use is back on the table. Michael.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this is the City Hall site. Current land use again is institutional. 2030 comp plan anticipated the eventual redevelopment of this site. The adjacent land use on First and across Homes is mixed use. Planning Commission recommended 4-0 that it be re-guided to mixed use. This is the conceptual plan for the project that would go on this site. 113 proposed parking spaces, retail lobby on Home Street, parking access from 2nd Street. Again, apartments on the upper level. And this is the rendering of the proposed development. So this is the Home Street side looking down 2nd. So this would have been the public entrance to the old City Hall. This is looking on 2nd next to the railway, and this is looking down Home Street towards the railway. So this has been approved for TIF funding districts. One of the things just for discussion tonight, this would still have to come back to you. The final piece for this would be a contract for private development. Originally it was approved with a 26-year TIF, first year in 20, sorry, that's 20, I'm having dyslexia with my numbers tonight, 2021 with a payoff in 2047, $2.382 million. Present value includes approximately $250,000 back to the city for the demolition costs, 70% of the concrete alley costs, 30% would be assessed to the adjacent property owners, $250,000 for streetscape work on Homes and 2nd, $100,000 for utility work and street repairs, and up to $1.6 million for foundation asbestos removal, new concrete shoring walls to make sure the railway and the streets don't fall in, underground parking, and a deck across them to build the building on. So that was the original proposal. Just for discussion tonight, Councilmember Luce brought up an idea which we've bounced off both our attorneys and our Springstead. So if the city were to interfund loan the TIF and get the 4% return instead of a bank getting a 5% return, it retires the TIF approximately 7 years earlier at a 1% inflation factor. Redevelopment housing generates a maximum value of TIF return, would be addressed in the final contract for private development. The developer would have to waive that appeal to evaluation. So on commercial, they're appealing all the time. We would ask them to sign a waiver that they would not appeal because that would impact potentially the city, since we're gonna be counting on that value to basically pay ourselves back. The developer and the mortgage holder would also have to warrant payment of the property taxes. So if the project were to go down, whoever the lender is, they would have to provide a guarantee that that property tax would still get paid because it's getting paid back to the city to fund the development. One of the interesting points about this is the city actually is, so we already expended the $250, so that's coming back to us. Typically, 70% of that concrete alley cost would come out of the general fund, with 30% being assessed to adjacent property owners. The $250,000 for streetscape work on Holmes and Second Street would typically come out of general fund or the EDA, and then the $100,000 in utility work, the utilities would typically bill that back to the city. That's an alley that's 100% at capacity right now. We saw it was done by TIF 20 or some odd years ago. The issue we're having, particularly with the wire utilities, those are the cable companies, the phone company, that fiber optics become pretty valuable down there, and with Spuck and all their stuff, the alleys are just too congested right now.
Yeah.
If this alley is gonna get redone, they would like us to pay our share as a city to upgrade the utilities in that area, because they already have existing easements. So that's about $100,000 in additional utility work for power, cable franchises, and I think the water line. The gas company actually will pay. They have an old metal pipe in that alley, which they want to convert to, I believe it's some kind of high-tech plastic. And so this will be one of the last alleys in downtown that has metal. So all that would occur as part of this project. So all the upgrades would go to the adjacent property owners, benefit also.
Questions, Counselor Lehman?
So the first year is 2021, not 2012,
Yes, I
correct?
apologize. Let me fix that right now, Councilman. Watch the magic of computers. There we go,
Look at that.
2021.
Okay, now, the other slide that you had up, it showed the TIF or the
Interest,
loan
funding.
or whatever, 4% interest.
So currently, if we interfund loan from one of our existing funds with no inflation, this is the interest that's paid over between August 1st, from 2021 to 2042, that's the 4% interest that's paid on top of the 2.3 million that's loaned. If you add in 1% interest, it actually shrinks this down and retires it in 2040. If the developer goes out, they're allowed a 5% interest rate. That's what the interest becomes, and it doesn't retire until 2047. And with 1% inflation, it retires the interest rate a little faster. It retires in 2043. And I think in discussions with our attorneys and with Springstead, this is a lot of cities. This is considered a smaller TIF, and since a lot of this stuff is stuff that we've either expended, we're paying ourselves back. They said it's worth looking at whether, when we get to the contract for private development, whether this is an avenue worth exploring, because we have available cash in other funds. 4%'s about a 2% better return than we get right now, so we would make an extra $350,000 over the life of this loan in additional interest.
Counselor Whiting?
You know, this proposal is a little bit of a change with the 30% for the concrete alley is assessed. Isn't that correct, or did we have that in the other plan?
So the other alley that we just did, that was part of the Lewis Street parking lot.
I'm talking about the other plan that we looked at.
The other plan we looked at was 100%, and I think we heard from the surrounding property owners that everyone should be on the same level playing field, that everyone should pay the 30%, because the other blocks, the people have paid 30%, and future blocks, they pay 30%. So this doesn't give anyone a special benefit.
This is the third block.
Oh, I like that point. I just wanted to make sure that that was a change.
Yep, it's a definite change, council member, and the 70% portion would come out of the TIF.
Okay. Michael, I have a question, I guess, for Darren. So if we do this in-house and interfund loan, do we have the money? How would that work? Just like all the rest of them, probably the sewer fund, is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, council members, it likely would come out of one of our enterprise funds. It would probably come out of the storm drainage fund at this point. You know, kind of to coin a term that Nate used earlier tonight, and kind of 6 to 1, half dozen to the other on that. You know, I don't know that there's concerns from a risk standpoint, but it does change the risk, is that it goes from a pay-go to the city being on the hook if something were to happen. But you know, it isn't a major concern of mine. And we've talked with our attorney and such like that with Springstead or with Kennedy and Graven and such, and there would be likely controls in place or fallbacks in place if something were to happen. We'd have a minimum assessment agreement or
some sort of guarantee. I mean,
some guarantee if there was a shortfall. That
the conversation, which was somewhat humorous, so Darren and I were on the conference call, and we said, we want to look at funding the apartment building downtown, and she went, that's going to be like 16 or 17 million dollars. We went, no, just the public infrastructure portion. She went, oh, we do that all the time.
And this decision wouldn't be made until we had the contract for private development, so there's, you can
Correct.
weigh the different options.
Mayor and council, we would bring Springstead and everyone to the table. You know, we just thought before we went down that path, we'd get some feedback tonight. Everyone that we've talked to they said it's a pretty good idea. It retires the TIF a lot quicker. As we know, 1% inflation is pretty conservative. You saw on the chart, very few of these go the full length. It's mostly city improvements. That alley, we would do one way or the other. We would pay that 70%. The only big risk here is the 1.6 million that's actually going into removing the old foundation and shoring up the sidewalks in the alley. And it's the developers here, it's a very complicated project because imagine that alley's full of stuff. So their contractor has to take it down and also hold all the alley up. And then they have to come in and replace the alley, all the stuff that's in the alley. And same with the train, you have to put enough pressure on that street to make sure the weight of that train doesn't push the wall. And that's why we left the old foundation in, because otherwise it would all collapse.
Exactly. Councilor Lehman?
So my question is, what happens if the developer and the mortgage holder doesn't want to waive their appeal evaluation and warrant payment of property taxes?
We wouldn't do the project then this way. We would have them go get a loan from the bank and it would take 25 years to pay it off. When we spoke with Springstead and with Julie from Kennedy and Graven, they said, look, there has to be some push because they're getting a value, so they don't have to go to a bank and put up, existing collateral, but they need to waive on their side the ability to take away the city's cash flow, which is that tax increase. And there needs to be some kind of guarantee that if the world comes to an end and that building's sitting there, they can't go to the tax collector and push it down. And the lender needs to understand from the get-go and put up some basically written guarantee that even if they implode and go away, the building sitting there continues to pay the property taxes.
All right, one last question on the TIF, and then we gotta get back to land use.
Well, the reason I came up with this was the fact that they pay less interest, which is a benefit to them. We get more interest, which is a benefit to us. Yeah, it's not a huge benefit. It's $300 and some thousand, but it's a decent benefit. And the reduction in their percentage of interest brings us into within 7 years early, which puts it all back on to the three taxing entities get the benefit early. So to me, it's a win-win all the way around.
Let's try to get back on, I know some of the financing aspect of it, but this is a land use from institutional to mixed use, and downtown has mixed use and commercial. This building will have residential and commercial in it, the proposal.
Mayor and Council, that's correct. So this would be a mixed-use building, predominantly residential with commercial on the lower level. And if you look at the other properties that are similar in the comprehensive plan and in the future comprehensive plan, it's mixed use.
Okay. Other questions of staff of the land use aspect of it, from what's before us, institutional to mixed use? Councilor Luce?
Well, with all the discussions that we've had on this, and we've had a couple of different sides to this issue, some want a parking lot, you know, some want the housing. The way I looked at it was after sitting down with the developer and hearing his side of it and talking about some of his other projects and taking a very close look at someone visiting a project, I would be willing to state that within 1, maybe 2 years of this building being completed, people are going, what new building? This has been here forever. You know, it's gonna be second nature. You know, it's not gonna change the landscape that much, but it's gonna benefit the downtown. I look at Shakopee downtown as we're standing in the doorway of, do we wanna move forward or do we wanna look back and be what we were? You know, change is hard for many, many people, and, you know, that it's something that, you know, some people are afraid of. And, you know, we can't go backwards, and this is the best plan in front of us for moving forward. And like I said, they haven't failed on any of their projects, and I don't see them failing on this one. So that's why I had this brought back.
Would you like to make a motion?
Go ahead,
Well, a quarter of the way down the page.
let's see.
We already did the
I did it with the right
rescind
spot.
or adopt.
Yep, no, I just had to get down to the right spot here. I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution number R 2018-102, approving a comp plan amendment to re-guide property at 129 Elm Street from institutional to mixed use and forward to the Metropolitan Council for final approval.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Mokel. Further discussion? I do believe too that this is moving forward out of an institutional use to a use that will benefit our downtown for years to come. Councilor, please.
You know, one thing I wanted to point out is the chart we saw earlier about how early the majority of these TIFs pay off, especially for housing. 81% of them pay off within 12 years. You know, we already, if we go ahead with the financing plan, we're gonna increase or decrease that 12 years by some. So, you know, that's with basic small inflation. You know, I just see this thing paying off early, and it'll be on the general tax rolls, and everybody's gonna benefit.
Maybe get to my 7 years, but.
Motion on the table, discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1 with a supermajority for a comp plan amendment.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. Moving ahead, 9A, the city bill list, which is here for our review. 9B, liaison administration report. Councilor Lehman?
I have no meetings.
All right. For my report, I attended the Shakopee Historical Society banquet the other night.
Heritage Society.
Huh?
The Heritage Society.
Heritage, every time. Heritage Society. I donated some money in a great event, and the rich history of our community is alive. Over the weekend, I represented the city of Shakopee at the La Crescent, Minnesota Apple Fest, along with the ambassadors. We're down there in the parade, so that was a great event. For a town festival that has 126 parade units, that goes on for 3 hours on a sunny day that lines their community. Be great someday to bring a parade back to Shakopee and of that nature.
Bull Snake Days.
Huh?
Bull Snake Days?
Yeah. That's my report. Councilor Whiting?
Thank you. I want to thank everyone that attended our Pathways of Shakopee History Project, and for those that donated. Many are in this room, so thank you. Other than that, I had no other business.
Thank you. Councilor Mokel?
I was also at the Shakopee Heritage Society event. It was a great event, and good to see what we're developing with the pathways. It was good to see them on print. So that's all.
Thank you very much. Our administrator report.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. First of all, I just want to report that Commissioner Dan Hennon has resigned his position with Shakopee Public Utilities. Commissioner Hennon was, by all accounts, a great commissioner on that particular board, did a great job, but he is moving to be closer to his work, which is frankly a loss to this community. My thanks go out to him. So we will be starting the process to find another commissioner, and more to come on that. As we know, yet tonight we're continuing to have sound issues. I'm very happy to say that relatively quickly here in the next couple of days, we will be transforming ourselves away from the old system that we brought from the old City Hall to a new system here, hopefully, which will take care of a lot of these sound issues. And that will be coming, and hopefully will be fully in place by the time we come back for our next meeting in October. And then finally, in this month's issue of Minnesota Cities Magazine, which is put out by the League, there's a real cool little article that talks about rink number 2's rink to field transition. As you know, we take the opportunity to transform rink number 2 after hockey season into a turf field. It's really amazing. When I walked out on that for the first time, I could not believe what a great field that was. But there's just a little snippet in there that talks about that and how that's worked out, which is tremendous. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor and members of council.
Excellent, thank you. Councilor Lehman, item number 10, other business.
No other business today, Mayor.
Thank you. Oh, Councilor Lewis.
No, I don't have any other business. I was just gonna make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, go ahead.
Make a motion to adjourn October 2nd, 2018 at 7 p.m.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned at 10:29. Thank you all.